Tyrion Lannister sat on the Iron Throne in the great hall of the Red Keep, gazing upon its columns and high windows through a faint haze of morning light. The seat of melted swords felt as cold beneath him as a stranger's handshake, and though the edges had been famously dulled, Daenerys had scorched the old throne into a half-fused sculpture of blackened metal. It still managed to remind him how precarious power truly was. Yet he had claimed the seat, this battered monument to centuries of blood and ambition, and the realm had bent its knee in a combination of awe, relief, and something that tasted almost like hope. Never had Tyrion imagined such a twist of fate, that he, the imp, a man scorned and belittled from the day he'd come mewling into the world, would become king of the Seven Kingdoms. He shifted carefully, one hand stroking the carved hilt of an ornamental dagger at his belt, the other cradling the arm of the throne. Only a few days had passed since his coronation, and each morning he felt the same wave of conflicting emotions. The queen he had once served, Daenerys Targaryen, lay dead by Jon Snow's hand. In the aftermath, lords and ladies gathered, fractured alliances were reformed, and Tyrion's own cunning, combined with the remnants of the Great Council's decision, had somehow placed him upon the throne. With Bran Stark turning down the crown, insisting his destiny lay beyond such titles, and Sansa refusing to abandon the North's hard-won independence, it had come down to Tyrion to seize what everyone else, in their weariness, had backed away from. Even Grey Worm's wrath had been quelled by the negotiations that promised a just rule for all, though the Unsullied had sailed for Noth soon after. Tyrion had ascended nearly by default. Now he was king, and all around him were reminders of the cost of crowns, of the weight he must carry. On this particular morning, the courtiers trickled in to greet him with the hush that had settled like dust throughout the city. King's Landing was half ruined by fire, but its inhabitants had begun rebuilding with a fervor that Tyrion found deeply moving. Flea Bottom struggled with the rubble, and still the people carried bricks and planks through the streets. The destruction from the dragon's fire had reduced entire districts to cinders, but the city had a resilience that reminded Tyrion of himself. He glanced at the courtiers, nodding at each in turn. Ser Bronn of the Blackwater, now elevated to Master of Coin, stood near the dais in sumptuous new doublet and cloak, though he insisted on keeping an old dagger strapped to his hip. Davos Seaworth, the new hand of the king, lingered to Tyrion's right, a small golden pin of the hand upon his cloak, lines of exhaustion etching his face. Other figures included Samwell Tarly, the newly anointed Grand Maester, who looked both nervous and awed to be standing in the great hall in that capacity, and a smattering of lesser lords from the Crownlands, the Westerlands, and the Riverlands. Tyrion waited for the hall to fill, small council members, petitioners, watchers. The metal of the throne pressed coldly into his shoulders and back, reminding him of the many kings and queens who had come before him, some triumphant, many doomed. The final war that had ravaged the continent was fresh in everyone's memory. The question that weighed on them all was how this new rule might guide them into a calmer future. Tyrion inhaled. His voice rose. "My lords and ladies," he began, and the echo fluttered over the fresh tapestries that had been hung to hide scorch marks on the walls. "I trust you have all come prepared to help rebuild our kingdom. We stand on uncertain ground, but let us shape it into something better than what came before." He paused, feeling every gaze upon him, the eyes of men and women who had seen dragons, White Walkers, and armies of the dead. "We have no shortage of tasks. Every man and woman who can lift a hammer or spin a thread is needed. Let us not wait for miracles, let us create them ourselves." In the hush that followed, Tyrion felt a prickling of self-consciousness, but he kept his chin high. A year ago, none would have believed the imp of House Lannister might speak as king of Westeros. Now the hush carried a fragile respect. The lords and ladies bowed in unison, and Tyrion's heart quickened at the sight of it. Respect was a coin that needed constant minting, he knew, but for this morning at least, he possessed it in enough measure to carry on. When the day's business was concluded, petitions heard, rebuilding efforts assessed, small councils scheduled, Tyrion descended from the throne. His stiff limbs complained, for the melted swords had never been designed for comfort, and the hours of listening weighed on him. Outside the hall, sunlight streamed in from narrow windows, illuminating the scorched stones that had been only cursorily scrubbed of ash. Tyrion squinted in the brightness and found Davos Seaworth at his side. Davos bowed his head slightly. "Your Grace." Tyrion nodded in return. "I'd rather you called me Tyrion, to be honest. This title doesn't come naturally." I understand," Davos said, pressing his lips together in a faint smile. "But you are the king, at least in public. They need to see the formality. The realm needs stability." Tyrion blew out a breath and nodded. "I know. Still, the formalities are damned uncomfortable." Davos gave him a sympathetic look. "You've enough sense to stay uneasy about power. That's comforting to us all." He looked down at Tyrion from a vantage of quiet respect. The city is stirring with rumors, your grace. Some wonder if you'll remain a Lannister first, king second. I can't blame them. House Lannister has given the world ample reason to fear us, Tyrion said, his tone softening. It falls on me to prove otherwise. And I will if the gods are kind. The gods seldom are, Davos said wryly, but perhaps men can be better than they've been. He touched Tyrion's shoulder. Shall we gather with the others and see what the day brings? Tyrion nodded. Together they exited into the courtyard. The remains of dragon-scorched towers stood grimly in the distance. The steps leading down from the Red Keep were chipped and uneven, but Tyrion made his way carefully, mindful of the watchers, guards, staff, and a smattering of small folk who had come to see the new king. He heard the whisper that always seemed to follow him, the Imp King. Most voices carried curiosity rather than disdain. They watched him in a way that stung a little less than it once had, for the city had endured so much. Perhaps they had no energy left to mock or scorn. Tyrion offered a faint smile to a girl peeking behind her mother's skirts. The child stared wide-eyed at his regal clothes, and her mouth formed a tiny O of wonder. Tyrion reached into his pocket and handed her a small wooden dragon figurine he had once carved in idle hours. The child took it shyly. A hush followed, and then Tyrion continued on his way, leaving behind a ripple of murmurs. He found Bronn waiting by the stables, a pair of guards at his side. Bronn looked amused as Tyrion approached. Well, your grace, he said, the grin on his face suggesting he found all of this a grand joke. Shall I fetch the carriage? Don't look so pleased with yourself, Tyrion said. You might be master of coin, but I'm still your king. And I won't have you funneling any more gold into that doomed brothel of yours until we've rebuilt half the city. He tried to sound stern, but there was a familiar warmth in his voice. He and Bronn had circled each other for years, bound by a strange brew of mutual benefit and grudging friendship. Fine, Bronn said, shrugging. But a man must have a retirement plan. Tyrion almost laughed, but the thought of how precarious life still was in King's Landing kept him somber. They stepped into a plain wooden carriage. Tyrion had refused any ornate, gilded contraption. The city needed timber for homes, not the vanity of a royal coach. A small squad of gold cloaks fell in line around them as the horses trotted off through the city's streets. Smoke still rose from the rubble in some districts, though the worst of the fires were out. The air carried a faint stench of ash and rot. Tyrion peered through the carriage window, his heart aching for the small folk rummaging through debris in search of anything salvageable. At each corner, there were signs of new planks going up, new stalls being erected, hammers ringing through the day. On nearly every street, a handful of laborers paused to stare at the passing carriage to see the king in his new role. The carriage paused at the edge of Flea Bottom, and Davos stepped down first to help direct the guards. Tyrion joined him, careful of the churned mud beneath his boots. Immediately, the small folk gathering around recognized him. Some drew close, a circle of anxious faces of people who had lost everything. He saw soot-stained cheeks, tattered clothes, haunted eyes. He remembered what it was like to look into that crowd as a Lannister official back when King's Landing had still been under his father's shadow. But now the weight was different. He was their ruler, the man they expected would help them. Tyrion had come here for precisely that reason, to inspect the relief efforts, ensure they were distributing bread, water, and building materials fairly. There were rumors that unscrupulous merchants were jacking up prices, hoarding what little grain was left. Davos stepped to Tyrion's side. We're working with local stewards to set up communal kitchens, he said. But we'll need more resources soon. What you see here, these folks have lost everything. Tyrion's mind raced. We'll pull from the crown's emergency stores. They've run low, but I'd rather empty them than see these people starve. Also, instruct the gold cloaks to watch the food stalls carefully for price gouging. He raised his voice so that everyone around could hear him. I'll not have men profit from the city's ruin. Any merchant who withholds food or inflates prices shall face the king's justice. A wave of murmurs rippled around him. Some faces lit with a desperate hope, others merely seemed exhausted. Tyrion knew a decree was only as good as its enforcement, and the city was large, but he had to at least try. Stepping forward, he took a closer look at some of the makeshift tents. A woman approached him cautiously, a babe in her arms, eyes hollow. Your Grace, she said in a wavering tone, my husband was in the square when the dragon came. We lost our home. I've no means to feed my children. Please, have mercy. Tyrion saw the tears glint in her eyes. The child in her arms mewled. He nodded to Davos, who drew out a small purse. Tyrion pressed some coins into the woman's hand. Use this to buy what you need, he told her, softly enough so it didn't seem like he was putting on a show. And see one of the city stewards, tell them the king sent you and you'll be assigned a place in one of the new communal houses until we can rebuild. Her eyes brimmed with gratitude. "Thank you, Your Grace," she whispered, and Tyrion's chest clenched at the rawness of that gesture. He had never been a sentimental man, at least, he told himself as much, but the heartbreak of these people stirred feelings in him he had scarcely recognized in his earlier years. He touched the baby's tiny hand, and the child reflexively curled its fingers around his thumb. After a few moments among the crowd, Tyrion gestured for the small council to continue deeper into the twisting alleys. Bronn followed, occasionally muttering under his breath about the stench. Samwell Tarly, who had joined them en route, struggled to keep up on foot, his wide face gleaming with sweat in the humid morning. "Your Grace, the Citadel's records mention times of famine," Samwell said, panting slightly. In each instance, the realm's best relief came from reorganizing farmland and ensuring the city had a proper aqueduct system. "We mustn't forget about clean water supply." Tyrion listened intently, though the swirl of voices in the marketplace threatened to drown Samwell out. "So you're suggesting we encourage small folk to return to the fields, rebuild the farmland first?" Tyrion asked. "Yes, and to fortify trade routes," Samwell replied. "We'll need grain from the Reach, and fish from the Vale's lakes. Trade must be restored quickly, or else the city's recovery will stagnate." Tyrion nodded. "Good. Draft a proposal for the small council tomorrow. I'll see that resources are allocated." The hours passed as they toured the battered streets, stopping to hear pleas from blacksmiths who had lost their forges, from septas tending to orphans, from weathered men who had once served in the city watch. Each conversation weighed heavier on Tyrion's heart, for the city had truly been brought to its knees. Yet amidst the rubble, he sensed a battered unity emerging. The final war, for all its horrors, had given them a common wound, one they might heal from together if they had proper leadership. By late afternoon, the sun beat mercilessly down. Tyrion's legs ached and his tongue was parched. He signaled for Davos and the others to return to the carriage. He needed water, shade, and a moment to think. As they clattered back toward the Red Keep, Tyrion leaned his head against the carriage wall. The day's events swirled in his mind, images of families huddling by the roadside, scorched rubble, half-burned signposts. He did not notice that he had shut his eyes until Davos called his name. "Tyrion," Davos said gently, with a pointed absence of "Your Grace, we're nearly back." "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." Tyrion scrubbed a hand down his face and blinked. "It's overwhelming," he admitted in a low voice, "but I have to do this." Davos nodded. "Aye, you do." They arrived at the Red Keep's courtyard, where the bustle of staff and guards parted for the returning king. Tyrion climbed down, ignoring the stiffness in his back, and drifted toward his private quarters for a moment's respite. Even in better days, he had never been the most physically vigorous man, but these daily rounds were vital for forging direct ties with the people. No matter how heavy the burden, Tyrion refused to hide away in the keep. He reached his chambers, which had once belonged to high lords or visitors of the court. These rooms were far more lavish than the tiny cells he'd been relegated to in his younger days, or the dank dungeon cell he had occupied briefly after betraying Cersei. Once inside, he locked the door behind him, letting out a shuddering breath. He peeled off his outer coat, thick with dust and sweat. Half collapsing into a chair by the fireplace, he closed his eyes. Sometimes, in the hush of these private moments, Tyrion found himself haunted by memories. The smell of dragon fire, the shrieks of terrified crowds, the whimpering of innocence burned alive in Daenerys's conquest. He had been so certain that Daenerys would be a good queen, that her compassion would triumph over her thirst for the throne. But the line between savior and tyrant had proven tragically thin. And then there were older memories. His father's cold eyes, his sister's sneer, the many times he had been laughed at for his stature. He might be king, but the ghost still roamed. When he opened his eyes, the flicker of the hearth reminded him that there was only one way forward. Step by step, day by day, forging a better future than the one left behind. There was a soft rap at the door. Tyrion sighed and called, "Enter." Ser Podrick Payne peeked in, still retaining that boyish earnestness despite the horrors of war. "Your Grace," Podrick said. "Ser Davos asked me to remind you that the small council meeting is in an hour." Tyrion nodded, mustering a brief smile. "Thank you, Pod. Please tell Ser Davos I'll be there." Pod nodded back and withdrew. Tyrion forced himself to stand, crossing to a basin of water to splash his face. He barely recognized the drawn features in the mirror. There were new lines around his eyes, silver in his hair and beard, but a certain fire glimmered in his gaze. He had survived. More than that, he was determined to make something worthwhile of this improbable second chance. Soon enough, he stepped into the small council chamber, taking the seat at the head of the table. Davos was already there, conferring with Samwell Tarly. Bronn lounged on a chair, boots propped rudely on the table's edge, whistling softly. Yara Greyjoy, representing the Iron Islands, sipped from a cup of ale, her eyes narrowed thoughtfully. And across from her sat Gendry Baratheon, the newly legitimized Lord of Storm's End, who had accepted the position as Master of Ships. Tyrion took a moment to survey them. This was a different small council than any he remembered, one drawn from unlikely alliances, a motley collection who had survived the final war and now aimed to rebuild. Tyrion cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" The others shifted their attention to him. "Samwell, if you'd please share news of the Citadel's progress with health and sanitation in the city." Samwell glanced at his notes. "Yes, Your Grace. We've instituted quarantine areas for the wounded with serious infections. We have new wells being dug to ensure a clean supply of water, and we hope to send out the first wave of trained healers." The meeting continued in that vein. Brief updates from each region, discussions of how to allocate resources, what roads to repair first, how to handle the large number of orphans left in the aftermath of war. Every voice at the table was serious, peppered with a subdued hope that they might steer Westeros into calmer waters at last. Tyrion listened carefully, interjecting ideas, defusing small quarrels, and noting obstacles. As the final matter was brought up, a band of outlaws harassing supply wagons near the Rose Road, Tyrion felt a surge of determination. This was what leadership required, not grandiose displays of power but methodical, thoughtful decisions that shaped everyday life. As the council dispersed, Bronn lingered, eyeing Tyrion with an expression that oscillated between wry amusement and genuine concern. "You're in deep now, aren't you? 1,000 troubles to juggle at once." "That's an understatement," Tyrion replied, sliding off his chair. "Though not the first time, is it?" Bronn chuckled. "True. I recall you once juggling a wildfire plot against Stannis, the plots of Cersei, and the general chaos of King's Landing. But at least back then you weren't the one bearing the crown. I was simply trying to ensure it landed on my nephew's head," Tyrion said, his tone sardonic. "And look how well that turned out." Bronn shrugged. "Maybe you'll do better. Gods know this city deserves a break." Tyrion let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "I couldn't agree more." As dusk settled, Tyrion found himself on a small balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. The ocean breeze carried a crispness he had missed in the smoke-choked city. Far below, the water glinted with the last embers of sunlight. It was here he often came to gather his thoughts. Looking out at the bay, he couldn't help but think of the battles that had been fought on those waters, of the men who had died, the ships that had burned. The realm had suffered greatly. Now it fell to him to mend as many wounds as he could. He heard a soft step behind him. Turning, Tyrion spotted Sansa Stark standing in the doorway wearing a simple yet elegant gown of northern weave. She had come from the north, overseeing its independence but visiting King's Landing to ensure her people's interests were not neglected. The tension of the past still echoed between them, but also a shared respect. She curtsied lightly, though not too deeply. "Your Grace." Tyrion bowed his head. "Lady Stark, I didn't hear you enter. I asked the guards to let me pass. I hope it's not an inconvenience." "Not at all," Tyrion said. "I'm pleased you're here." He gestured for her to join him at the balcony rail, and she came forward, her red hair catching the dying sunlight. They stood in silence for a moment. Tyrion could see the faint lines of sorrow beneath her composed exterior, sorrow for her family's losses, for the ravaged land she'd witnessed on the way south. "I wanted to speak with you about our alliances," Sansa began, folding her hands. "The North is doing better than King's Landing in terms of destruction. We were spared the dragon's wrath, but we still suffered. Our fields are under stress from the long winter and the war." Tyrion nodded, studying her carefully. "What do you propose, my lady?" She glanced at him, her gray eyes sharp. "Grain. We have some surpluses in certain areas that remained untouched by fighting. I propose a trade with the Crownlands, food in exchange for raw materials we can't easily produce ourselves." Tyrion considered that. "Are you offering this trade freely, or do you have conditions?" Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "The North is independent now, as per our agreement. We want to maintain strong ties with the rest of Westeros. I won't gouge your prices. We fought alongside each other against the Night King and the Mad Queen. We all need each other if we're to survive." Tyrion's gaze flicked across her face, recalling how far she had come from the frightened girl who once trusted in fairy tales. I agree, he said gently. I'll make the arrangements for an envoy to finalize terms. Your generosity is appreciated more than you know. The city is starved for resources. She inclined her head. I'm willing to help. I remember when I was a child here how the small folk suffered even then under far less dire circumstances. No one deserves to endure what King's Landing has endured. They stood a moment in silence, listening to the gulls cry over the bay. Tyrion cleared his throat. Will you stay a while in the city? We could use your counsel. Sansa hesitated. I must return north soon. There are still tensions near the Vale border. But I plan to remain until we solidify this new arrangement. After that, well, I may come and go. Her eyes flicked over Tyrion's shoulder as if searching for something in the gathering twilight. I never thought to see you on that throne, Tyrion, she said, her voice quieter. But then again, I never thought the world would break so completely. Tyrion laughed softly, though there was little humor in it. My sentiments exactly. Sansa's gaze rested on him. Be careful with power, she said at last. It can change people in ways they never anticipate. Tyrion's lips thinned. I know all too well. Soon, Sansa excused herself to attend to her own matters, leaving Tyrion alone with the gathering darkness. He remained there, thinking of the complex web he now had to navigate, not just the day-to-day rebuilding but also the delicate alliances that stretched across the realm. Each lord and lady had their own interests, their own grudges. He was determined to prevent the old resentments from igniting into fresh bloodshed. Later that night, Tyrion retired to his bed exhausted. Dreams tugged at him, memories swirling, the face of Daenerys, once shining with hope, then twisted with fury, Jon Snow's anguished eyes as he did what he believed necessary to save countless lives, the silhouettes of dragons over the city walls. At one point, Tyrion dreamed he was still a prisoner in the Red Keep's dungeon, a voice mocking him from the shadows. He awoke with a jolt, cold sweat on his brow, heart thundering. Gathering his wits, he realized dawn was breaking, pale light creeping in. The nightmares receded, but their echoes lingered. There was no going back to sleep, so he rose, dressed, and prepared for the day. Davos and Bronn were waiting by the stables for an early morning tour of the southern gates where refugees from the Reach trickled in. As Tyrion approached, he nodded a greeting. Bronn yawned, complaining of the early hour, while Davos looked as if he'd slept in his clothes. The three men mounted horses, Tyrion on a stout chestnut gelding, Davos on a rangy gray, and Bronn on a sleek black mare. They rode out of the Red Keep, crossing the city that was just stirring awake. Merchants opened shutters, children scurried to gather water, and a faint haze of cooking fires rose toward a sky streaked with pink and gold. At the city gates, a hodgepodge of wagons and travelers waited for permission to enter. The Goldcloaks had set up a checkpoint and lines were forming. Tyrion and his companions dismounted, ignoring the startled bows and stares from both guards and smallfolk. Tyrion's presence was still something of a novelty. Most had never seen a king strolling around with minimal fanfare. A guard captain approached, saluting. Your Grace, we're assessing the new arrivals for contraband or illness. It's slow going, but we don't want to admit criminals or spread disease within the walls. Tyrion nodded. Prudent enough, but see that you're thorough yet fair. We don't want to turn away honest folk who just need a place to rebuild their lives. Tyrion surveyed the refugees, farmers, tradesmen, families with small children. Some led battered donkeys or half-starved mules loaded with possessions. He stepped closer, ignoring the guard's cautionary glance, and greeted a middle-aged man with leathery skin. Where are you from? Tyrion asked. The man bowed awkwardly. From a village near Tumbleton, Your Grace. The fields burned when bandits came through. My family and I have nowhere else to go. Tyrion's expression softened. Once you pass inspection, speak to the city stewards. They'll direct you to available shelters and let you know where you can find work. The man nodded gratefully and moved on, leading a young boy and a donkey carrying their meager belongings. Bronn, who had been scanning the crowd with a hawk's gaze, let out a low whistle. It's going to be some time before King's Landing feels like a proper city again. Looks more like a refugee camp with walls. Tyrion exhaled, his breath stirring dust in the morning air. That's the reality. But we'll do what must be done. We'll get them settled, find them tasks. A city is its people, and we need all who are willing to help rebuild. They lingered, ensuring the process moved smoothly. When a scuffle broke out, two men fighting over a donkey, the Goldcloaks intervened, and Tyrion insisted they settle the matter by hearing both men's claims. It turned out one had stolen the donkey from the other's stable during the night, hoping to reach the city faster. Tyrion decreed the donkey should be returned to its rightful owner and made the thief take a labor oath to repay what he had done. While harshness could sometimes quell chaos, Tyrion had grown weary of punishments that escalated violence. He preferred to impose fairness combined with accountability. When the tension dissipated, some in the crowd looked at Tyrion with tentative approval. They might have expected beheadings and cruelty from one bearing the Lannister name. Instead, they saw something different. Shortly after midday, Tyrion and his companions returned to the Red Keep, leaving the gates under the guard's supervision. Before Tyrion could retire for a break, a messenger approached, breathless, bearing a sealed letter from Dorne. Tyrion broke the seal and scanned the parchment, eyebrows lifting. The Prince of Dorne, newly ascended after the previous house's destruction, had expressed guarded willingness to join in the realm's recovery provided the crown recognized Dorne's historical autonomy in local governance. Tyrion smiled wryly. Westeros was becoming a patchwork of semi-independent regions all cooperating with the central monarchy. Strange times indeed, but better than open rebellion. He made his way to the council chambers where Samwell was scribbling notes. "Sam," Tyrion said, brandishing the Dornish letter, "it appears Dorne is willing to help supply fresh fruit and spices if we formally agree they can manage their domain without interference from the crown. Thoughts?" Samwell wiped his quill on a cloth. "Dorne has always been fiercely independent," he said carefully. "I think it's wise to respect their customs if we want their cooperation." Tyrion nodded, tapping the letter lightly against his palm. "I agree. The realm is large, and I'd rather see each region thrive under their own traditions than force uniform rule that only leads to resentment." His voice trailed off, and he remembered a time when Cersei had tried to stamp out any hint of disloyalty through fear and manipulation. It never ended well. "Send a raven," Tyrion continued, "and let them know I'm happy to discuss the details. Tell them I respect Dorne's right to self-govern so long as they remain allied with the crown in matters of trade and mutual defense." Samwell nodded eagerly and took up his quill again. Tyrion suppressed a weary grin. This was what rulership looked like. Endless negotiations, forging compacts that left everyone partially satisfied but mostly at peace. It was far from the glorious conquest some rulers craved, but it was exactly the sort of quiet progress he believed Westeros needed. In the following weeks, more and more shipments of supplies trickled into King's Landing. Garrisons from the Westerlands, brought by the leadership Tyrion had installed there after Cersei's downfall, helped patrol the roads. The Tyrells were gone, but the stewards of Highgarden were eager to re-establish trade routes, shipping grain in exchange for coin and influence. The labor of the small folk rebuilt the walls brick by brick, the stonemasons took on new apprentices, and the city's forges lit up with the clang of hammers shaping nails, hinges, and other essentials. Tyrion, Davos, and Bronn made frequent rounds, hearing complaints, punishing corrupt officials, championing loyal ones. Tensions flared here and there, some pockets of the city turned resentful, especially old loyalists to Cersei or Daenerys. Yet overall, the slow tide of stability began to rise, and with it came the first traces of optimism. One late afternoon, after another exhaustive day, Tyrion found himself in the Red Keep's Godwood. It was a modest plot of greenery, not as ancient as Winterfell's. But a lone weirwood tree stood at the center, its white bark and carved face stark against the encroaching twilight. He often came here to think, hoping to find some measure of calm amid the swirl of duty. The leaves rustled softly, and he reflected on the Stark's reverence for such sacred spaces. He wondered if the old gods had any fondness for a Lannister who had stumbled his way onto the throne. The soft crunch of footsteps alerted him that he was not alone. Looking over his shoulder, he saw Jon Snow approaching. Jon wore simple leathers, his dark hair pulled back in a neat tie. After the final war, Jon had chosen exile to the far north with the Free Folk, but he occasionally traveled south to meet with Sansa or to see how Westeros fared under Tyrion's rule. Tyrion met Jon's eyes with a mixture of relief and sadness. "Jon," Tyrion said, inclining his head. "I wasn't expecting you." Jon's gaze swept the Godwood, then settled on Tyrion. "I arrived with a few of my northern friends," he said. "We brought some news. There have been small skirmishes near the Gift, wildlings trying to resettle, a few lords not taking kindly to them. But it's nothing we can't handle." Tyrion nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And how fares the Night's Watch? What remains of it, that is?" A faint smirk tugged at Jon's lips. "It's less about the watch these days, more about guiding the free folk who choose to live south of the Wall. But we keep an eye on the northern threats, such as they are." Tyrion waved for Jon to join him under the weirwood's canopy. "Thank you for coming. I've wanted to speak with you. How do you find the city?" Jon's expression grew pensive. "It's changed. Some parts still look like ruins, but I can feel the energy, the rebuilding. People speak of hope, not just fear. They mention you by name and it's not always curses. That's something. It is, Tyrion said quietly. He gestured to a bench beneath the tree and both men sat. For a moment they listened to the breeze rustling through the leaves. Finally Tyrion said, Jon, I've wanted to ask your counsel on something important. You've seen what war does. I'd like to ensure we maintain peace if we can. Jon nodded. I'm listening. There's talk of forging a new alliance, a lasting peace between the newly independent North, Dorne, the Iron Islands, and the Crownlands. Something akin to a confederation, each region self-governing, but allied in trade, mutual defense, and open dialogue. A final fracturing of the old system so we never return to the tyranny of a single iron rule that crushes everyone. Jon leaned back, eyes lingering on Tyrion. That's bold, Tyrion. Are you not worried you'll be throwing away the authority of the throne? Tyrion inhaled, remembering a lifetime of clinging to scraps of power. No, he said at last. Because what did the throne ever really bring except strife? The final war proved that absolute power can lead to absolute devastation. If I can shape a system where the king is more a mediator than a tyrant, maybe we can avoid repeating old mistakes. Jon looked away, his gaze distant. Tyrion suspected he was recalling Daenerys, her fiery idealism, and how it twisted into destruction. Finally, Jon spoke. If that's your plan, you have my support for whatever that's worth. I can speak to the Northern Lords, tell them to consider your proposal. Tyrion offered a slight, grateful smile. Thank you. I'm under no illusions it will be easy. Men hunger for power and old grudges run deep. But this might be our best chance to bring lasting peace to Westeros. Jon's eyes flicked back to him. You always did have a mind for grand ideas, Tyrion. I only hope the rest of Westeros can see the sense in it. He paused, then added, and I hope you can carry the burden without losing yourself. Tyrion nodded. I appreciate the concern. I have no wish to repeat the mistakes of those who came before. That's why I want checks on my own power, something a younger Tyrion might never have imagined. They spoke a while longer, discussing the situation beyond the wall, the transformations in the city, and the uncertain future. As evening deepened, torches were lit along the pathways in the Red Keep, and the two men parted ways. Jon to find rest in the keep's guest quarters, Tyrion to resume his kingly duties. At dinner, the small council convened in a more informal setting. A side chamber where a modest meal of roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and spiced wine awaited. Tyrion preferred these informal gatherings for forging deeper understanding with his closest advisors. Yara Greyjoy recounted how the Iron Islands had fared, grumbling about a few wayward Ironborn who persisted in raiding rather than trading. Bronn complained about the constant demands on the treasury, but admitted the city's finances were slowly recovering. Samwell Tarly shared news of the Citadel's endeavors to train new maesters faster, hoping to replace the many lost in the wars. Davos listened quietly, chiming in when necessary to ensure the conversation remained constructive. Gendry offered updates on shipbuilding along the Blackwater, ensuring trade routes remained open and protected. And, to Tyrion's mild surprise, Sansa appeared, sharing her perspective on the North's readiness to participate in an interregional alliance. The discussions were lively yet civil, each person contributing to a tapestry of strategies. Afterwards, as the group dispersed, Tyrion felt a certain warmth in his chest. This was a council drawn together by necessity and mutual respect, not by fear or tyranny. For the first time in a long while, he believed they might succeed in building something that outlasted them all. The weeks turned into months. The city gradually shed its charred shell. District by district, scaffolding rose, new structures went up, and the rubble was carted away. Gardens sprang to life where burned-out courtyards had once stood, as Tyrion encouraged the people to plant wherever they could to supplement food supplies. Markets reopened, bustling with life, and though the scars of war were far from erased, hope began to outgrow despair. Tyrion continued his daily tours, sometimes mounted, sometimes on foot, always pausing to speak with the people and to share in their struggles. One evening, as Tyrion was signing a batch of royal decrees, a courier rushed in with news that a large Dornish caravan was spotted south of the city, bearing gifts. Tyrion raised an eyebrow. This could signify that his alliance was taking shape faster than expected. He donned a freshly laundered doublet, pinned the royal sigil at his breast, and made his way to the throne room. The caravan arrived just before sunset. Dornish riders in bright silks accompanied wagons laden with citrus fruits, aromatic spices, and exotic wines. Leading them was the new Prince of Dorne himself, a tall, dark-haired man named Corin Martell, whose regal bearing reminded Tyrion of the late Prince Oberyn in certain gestures. Corin bowed deeply as he approached the dais where Tyrion sat. "Your Grace," Corin said, his voice smooth. "Dorne greets you in friendship. May this offering of our bounty be a prelude to a partnership that benefits us all." Tyrion inclined his head. "Prince Corin, you honor us with your generosity. The realm thanks you." He gestured for the courtiers to step aside, allowing the prince to join him near the throne. "I trust your journey was uneventful?" Corin gave a small, knowing smile. "We encountered a few rogues on the Rose Road, but your guards dealt with them swiftly. I must commend you, King Tyrion. The roads are safer than I expected, given the city's recent trials." "We do what we can," Tyrion said. "I hope you'll find the city in a state of rebuilding, still battered, but standing." They proceeded to the small council chamber for a private audience. Over cups of Dornish red, Corin explained his vision for Dorne's place in the new Westeros, a region proud of its heritage, maintaining local governance but pledging loyalty to the realm's collective defense. In exchange, they desired the crown's recognition of certain ancient rights and a fair share in the trade of resources from the other regions. Tyrion listened carefully, occasionally exchanging glances with Davos, Samwell, and Sansa, who had joined. Once Corin finished, Tyrion set his cup down. "Prince Corin, this is more than acceptable. We want strong allies, not reluctant subjects. I propose we formalize this. Dorne shall be free to govern itself, provided it does not raise arms against the crown or the allied regions. We'll sign a mutual defense treaty. If one region is attacked, all rally to its aid. We also agree on free trade among our territories with minimal tariffs." Corin's dark eyes gleamed. "It seems we are in agreement, Your Grace." He looked around at the gathered council. "I admit, we in Dorne have always viewed the Iron Throne with some suspicion. But if this new era truly respects our autonomy, we have no reason to remain hostile." "Then let us drink to our newfound peace," Tyrion declared, lifting his cup. Wine splashed gently, reflecting in the flickering candlelight. They toasted. For a moment, a collective sigh of relief passed through the chamber, a sense that after centuries of conflict, the seeds of a more balanced realm had finally been planted. After Corin departed, Tyrion sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. Sansa spoke first, her voice carrying a note of cautious optimism. "If Dorne is willing to set aside old grievances, that's a promising sign for the rest of Westeros." Davos nodded. "Aye, Your Grace. You've started something that might spread. Already, I hear the Riverlands are keen to join this confederation. They suffered terribly under the wars, and they see this as a chance for stability." Tyrion glanced at each of them. "I'll not celebrate too soon. We all know how quickly alliances can crumble if tested by ambition or fear. Still, I dare hope we might succeed." He let out a breath, feeling a coil of tension unspool in his chest. "Thank you all for your hard work. This is not just my doing, it's all of ours." Sansa inclined her head, and a small smile ghosted her lips. "You're learning that rule can't be done alone." He returned a tired grin. "Indeed." As time marched on, word spread across Westeros of the new king's attempts to foster a realm of cooperation. Some called him Tyrion the Wise, others Tyrion the Impish King. Letters arrived from the Vale, from Storm's End, from the Reach, all expressing varying degrees of willingness to talk, to sign treaties similar to Dorne's. Not every lord was enthusiastic, some feared giving up the chance to assert themselves as supreme. But slowly, one by one, the major houses joined the alliance, or at least began negotiations. The realm's power was no longer centered on the Iron Throne alone, but on a network of mutual agreements that made war less appealing. With each signature, each oath sworn, Tyrion felt the realm inching away from the brink of chaos. Of course, not all was smooth. Clashes with rogue bannermen occurred, some brazenly calling Tyrion a traitor to tradition, a dwarf who had no right to the throne. Others tried to exploit the new freedoms for personal gain. Tyrion handled them carefully, alternating between diplomacy and firm justice. Each time, he reminded himself that leadership meant walking a tightrope between compassion and strength. One notable challenge came from remnants of Daenerys' loyalists who believed the Dragon Queen's mission had been just and Tyrion had betrayed her cause. They staged protests in certain areas, occasionally incited violence. Tyrion ordered negotiations with their leaders, offering amnesty if they laid down arms. Some accepted, acknowledging that the wars had cost enough blood. Others refused, harboring a fanatic loyalty to the memory of Daenerys. The Gold Cloaks and local lords had to quell these disturbances, arresting or driving off the most fervent rebels. Tyrion took no pleasure in this. Each confrontation reminded him of the complexities of Daenerys's legacy. How her dream of breaking the wheel had ended in fire and terror, yet still held an allure for those who yearned for dramatic change. In the midst of these ongoing efforts, Tyrion found small pockets of solace. A sense of camaraderie developed among the small council, and on rare nights they even shared laughter. Podrick Payne, now a trusted knight, faithfully guarded Tyrion's door and occasionally entertained him with a new song he had learned. Samwell Tarly continued to research policies in the Citadel's tomes, each new revelation fueling the next wave of reforms like standardizing measurements and currency throughout the Confederated regions. Davos kept a firm, guiding hand on practical matters, ensuring no idealistic plan overlooked the basic necessities of daily life. Bronn, for all his complaints, seemed genuinely invested in seeing the city prosper, if only so the flow of coin continued. And Sansa Stark became a steady ally, frequently traveling between Winterfell and King's Landing to represent northern interests and lend her strategic mind to the realm's future. Sometimes Tyrion even allowed himself the comfort of wine late in the evening, though he tempered his intake. He sat on a balcony or in a quiet library corner, sipping from a goblet, gazing over the flickering lights of a city that was slowly resurrecting itself from the ashes. On these evenings, he would raise a silent toast to those who had fallen, to his brother Jaime, who had tried to save Cersei in the final hours, to Daenerys, whose idealism had once shone so brightly, to Missandei, to Mormont, to all who had fought in the Great War against the Night King. Their sacrifices were woven into the city's new tapestry. He vowed to honor them by refusing to let the realm sink into another cycle of hatred and brutality. As the first anniversary of his coronation approached, Tyrion felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Anniversaries often brought reflection, and he remembered with painful clarity the day he had ascended the throne, an event overshadowed by death, betrayal, and the smoldering ruins of King's Landing. Now, a year later, the city was unrecognizable in many parts. Walls had been rebuilt, homes reconstructed, new marketplaces established. People laughed in the streets again, children played, and the bells that once told doom now rang for weddings and celebrations. The difference was stark, a testament to the resilience of human spirit, and Tyrion allowed himself to believe to the efforts of a ruler who cared. On the day of the anniversary, the great hall was filled once more, but this time not with the hush of mourning. Vibrant banners flew overhead, banners of each house that had joined the new confederation, along with the Lannister lion and the Stark direwolf, out of recognition for the alliance between North and Crown. Tyrion had arranged for a modest ceremony to commemorate the city's rebuilding efforts, awarding honors to stonemasons, blacksmiths, healers, and others who had dedicated themselves selflessly to the cause. There were no grand feasts dripping with gold or ostentatious displays. Instead, tables of fresh bread, roasted meats, and Dornish fruits were laid out, open to everyone who could fit in the courtyard. Tyrion wanted the anniversary to be a day of gratitude, not vanity. As he stood on a small dais to address the crowd, Tyrion felt a wave of emotion that nearly stole his words. Before him were people of all stations, from highborn lords to street urchins, mingling in relative peace. The hush that fell as he raised a hand was profound. He looked out, meeting as many eyes as he could, and then spoke, his voice resonating in the lofty space. My friends, we gather not to celebrate a king, but to celebrate a city, a kingdom, a people who have refused to surrender to despair. 1 year ago, King's Landing lay in ruins. Many of us believed hope had died in the ashes. But here we stand, with new walls, new homes, and new dreams. None of this would have been possible without the toil and sacrifice of everyone here, and many beyond these walls. Today, we honor each of you. It is your determination that has carried us forward. He paused, letting his gaze flick toward the small council, Davos, Samwell, Bronn, Sansa, Gendry, Yara, all watching solemnly. I thank you for placing your trust in me. I promise that as long as I sit on this throne, he gestured toward the melted metal sculpture behind him, I will do everything in my power to protect our fragile peace, to serve justice rather than cruelty, and to remember that this realm belongs to all of us, not to one name or one house. May we continue on this path together. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling as the crowd's relief and gratitude found voice. Tyrion inclined his head, acknowledging it, while inwardly he marveled at how different this moment felt from any other applause he'd received in his life. It felt genuine, unforced. For a man who had been scorned and belittled from birth, the sound was almost overwhelming. After the official ceremony, Tyrion left the dais, mingling among the people as a gentle hush of conversation spread. Children scampered around with sticky fingers from fruit tarts. Noble ladies in fine gowns chatted with blacksmiths in soot-stained aprons. Tyrion spotted an old woman who had once thrown insults at him in the street years ago. Now she gave him a toothless smile and a respectful nod. Time changes everything. He felt a tug on his sleeve and looked down to see the same girl he'd once given a carved wooden dragon to. She was older now, her hair brushed neatly, holding that little dragon figurine in her hands. "Your Grace," she said, "do you remember me?" Tyrion smiled gently, crouching to her level. "I do. You still have the dragon?" She nodded, pride glowing in her small face. "You said we should make our own miracles. I kept it to remind me. My mother built a new stall in the market, and we have a proper home now." Emotion welled in Tyrion's chest. "I'm glad to hear it," he managed. "Truly." The child beamed, then scampered off to join her friends. Tyrion watched her go, feeling a lump rise in his throat. That, he realized, was why he bore the crown every day despite the burdens. To see a child hold on to hope and laughter. As evening settled in, torches were lit around the courtyard, casting dancing shadows. The celebration became more subdued, a quiet joy rather than wild revelry. Tyrion stood near a brazier with Davos and Sansa. They spoke of future plans, expanding the city's aqueducts, organizing a supply route with the Vale, introducing new laws to encourage fair trade. The conversation was calm, brimming with possibilities. Eventually, a herald announced that the king would retire for the evening. Tyrion nodded politely, bidding everyone a good night. He made his way through the corridors, the weight of the crown like a steady presence atop his head. Yet the burden was somehow lighter tonight, buoyed by the promise of a realm learning to heal. As he stepped into his chambers and dismissed the few attendants, he let out a long breath. Alone, he removed the crown, setting it on a small table. He gazed at it, remembering all the history that crowns had symbolized: tyranny, bloodshed, greed. But perhaps, he mused, a crown could stand for something else. Service, reconciliation, hope. If he managed to guide Westeros safely into the coming years, maybe future generations would speak of this time not as an age of conquest, but as an age of unity. The idea made him smile, weary though he was. He stripped off his formal attire, changing into a simple tunic. Before lying down, he poured himself a small cup of wine, stepped onto the balcony, and looked out over the slumbering city. Flickers of torchlight and lanterns glowed among the rebuilt streets, winding toward the horizon. He took a sip, savoring its warmth. Somewhere out there, thousands of lives continued, working, dreaming, forging new beginnings, all under the protection of a king who had once believed he would never be loved, never be respected, never rise above the scorn of his father and sister. Now, the Seven Kingdoms, well, what remained under the name, looked to him for guidance. Setting his wine aside, Tyrion closed his eyes and inhaled the night air, scented faintly with the sea and the smoke of countless hearth fires. A sense of calm settled over him. This was not a fairy tale ending, nor did he believe in such illusions anymore. Hard times would come again. Disputes would arise. Enemies would emerge. Yet, for this moment, he allowed himself to feel a fragile contentment. He had risen from the ashes of war to become a king who sought to break old patterns rather than reinforce them. It was an improbable fate for an imp who had spent much of his life battling prejudice and cruelty. But if the final war had taught them anything, it was that life was precious and precarious, and second chances were rare gifts. He allowed himself a last glance at the city lights, then turned and made his way to bed, where troubled dreams would no doubt find him. But he would meet them as he did the waking day, resolved to keep building a better realm, one stone at a time, for as long as the fates allowed him to wear that crown. In that quiet chamber, the torchlight casting flickering patterns on the walls, the king of the Seven Kingdoms, once Tyrion Lannister, reviled dwarf of Casterly Rock, finally let his eyes close, carrying with him into sleep the faint but vital embers of hope. Tyrion rose the next morning later than usual, having slept fitfully but longer than he had in weeks. The first thing he noticed was how quiet the Red Keep seemed, with even the usual patter of servants' feet subdued. The city outside might be bustling, but the keep itself exhaled a gentle hush in the early light. For once, he found no messenger pounding on his door, no crisis demanding his immediate attention before he'd even broken his fast. He slid off the bed with a soft groan, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, and stood for a moment in a shaft of pale sunlight. Although the burdens of rule never truly disappeared, this unaccustomed sense of stillness gave him a fleeting relief, as though the day might unfold at his pace rather than driving him forward with the usual urgency. He took a moment to breathe, to run a hand through the silver-threaded hair at his temples, and to remember that yesterday's celebrations had marked a full year of his improbable reign. He splashed cool water on his face from the basin, then dressed in modest attire, a dark tunic embroidered subtly with the crowned lion of House Lannister. The lines around his eyes seemed faintly softer than they had in weeks, or so he imagined. Perhaps he had begun to adapt to the demands of his position, though he doubted he would ever be truly free of worry. He fastened the belt at his waist and stepped out into the hallway, nodding to Podrick Payne, who sprang alert from where he'd stood guard by the door. "Good morning, Your Grace," Podrick said, a small bow. "Would you like breakfast in your solar?" Tyrion considered. "That sounds agreeable. I'll see if Ser Davos or Sam will join me. Please ask them if they're free. If not, I'd rather not disturb them. Everyone deserves a moment's rest." Podrick nodded, and Tyrion continued on, passing tapestries old and new. A year ago, many of these corridors had reeked of ash and smoke, blackened from dragonfire. Now, much of the interior had been repaired, though the Red Keep still bore scars if one looked carefully. Places where the stone had been scorched or partial walls replaced with fresh masonry. Tyrion remembered the chaos of that final conquest, the screams and the roar of flames. It haunted him even as he supervised the repairs. But he told himself that each repaired corridor, each new tapestry, was a testament to the city's refusal to remain a ruin. He entered his solar, a modest room with tall windows overlooking Blackwater Bay. The morning sun flashed on the water, a golden path that led away to the horizon. The breeze through the open casements carried the hint of salt, and it reminded him of the many ships and travelers who came to King's Landing every day, bringing hope, trade, or sometimes trouble. In the corner, a simple table was set with bread, cheese, boiled eggs, and a pitcher of watered wine. Tyrion poured himself a cup, sipped, and found it tart on his tongue but refreshing enough. As he tore off a piece of bread, a quiet knock came on the door. He bid them enter, and Samwell Tarly appeared, clutching a ledger under his arm. "Your Grace," Sam said with an apologetic half-smile, "Podrick told me you were breaking your fast here. I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Tyrion said warmly, gesturing for Sam to join him. "Pour yourself some wine or water, though I'll warn you it's a bit sour. And please, stop calling me Your Grace when we're in private. My name hasn't changed." Sam's face pinked slightly. "Of course, Tyrion." He glanced around the solar, setting his ledger down carefully, then reached for a cup. "I have some news from the Citadel and from our healers around the city, if now is a good time to discuss." Tyrion motioned for him to continue. "Better now than later, before the day swallows me whole." Sam filled his cup and took a sip, wrinkling his nose at the tartness. "We've had success treating a new wave of flux that broke out in Flea Bottom. One of our maesters discovered that boiling water with certain herbs helps quell the worst symptoms, and once the people understood the method, the spread began to slow. It's not a miracle cure, but it's progress. Also, the Citadel's continuing to send more novices to train here. We'll soon have more healers throughout the city." Tyrion nodded. "Good. We can't rebuild if disease runs rampant. Any sign of the winter sickness returning?" "Not significantly," Sam said. "What popped up was mild and we contained it. The orphans' shelters are particularly vulnerable, so we've stationed a small cluster of healers in each." Tyrion exhaled, glad to hear it. "Very well. And you, Sam, how are you faring? You look a bit exhausted." Sam gave a self-deprecating chuckle. "I'm fine, just busy. There's so much to do, so many records to organize. We're formalizing new laws, forging alliances, codifying trade agreements. The scribes can hardly keep up. But I'm happy to help. I appreciate it." Tyrion tore off another piece of bread and dipped it in a bit of soft cheese. "Speaking of alliances, have you heard any official word from the Reach's stewards regarding the confederation we're building?" "Yes," Sam replied, brightening. "They're receptive. Many small folk there feel the loss of House Tyrell keenly, but the stewards in Highgarden have promised to lend their voice. They'd like to unify behind a figurehead if possible, someone with ties to House Tyrell or a recognized lineage. But for now, they're satisfied so long as their harvests can be sold throughout Westeros at stable prices. Tyrion considered that. They want a name, a banner. I suppose it's only natural. People like to have something to rally around, even if House Tyrell is gone. Perhaps they can re-establish a minor branch or find some cousin. It's not my place to direct them, only to ensure they don't cause trouble. Our main goal is unity rather than enthroning new monarchs in each region. Sam nodded. Exactly. In time, perhaps they'll select a strong local leader, someone who can balance the old traditions with the new confederation. In the meantime, the seeds are sown. Good, Tyrion said. Let's keep an eye on the harvest yields. We'll need plenty of shipments if King's Landing's population continues to grow. They discussed further details while finishing their modest meal. By the time Sam departed, Tyrion felt the day was off to a far better start than most. He rose, straightened his tunic, and decided it was time to see what else the day might bring. A small list of tasks swirled in his thoughts. A pending meeting with the Master of Laws about the city's new code of conduct, a discussion with the Gold Cloaks regarding a spate of petty robberies in the Western District, and of course the ongoing negotiations with representatives from distant corners of Westeros. No day was truly quiet. He stepped into the corridor, and within moments, he heard Bronn's distinctive voice echoing around a corner. I told you, you can't expect me to handle all this with a snap of my fingers. If we're to pay for better roads, we need coin. If we need coin, we need taxes. So unless you plan to conjure gold from the clouds. The words trailed off as Bronn strode into view, followed by a harried-looking scribe. When Bronn spotted Tyrion, he paused. Your Grace. Aerys halted, meeting the cold gaze. You think you've won? Cersei called down. The realm will never accept a Targaryen tyrant. Your father's shadow is long. Your crimes will echo for generations. Daenerys ascended a few steps, each footfall echoing in the silence. I have no love for tyranny, she said, voice carrying. I do not come to destroy the city or enslave its people. I come to end your reign of terror. Surrender, Cersei. Save your people from further bloodshed. Cersei's eyes flickered with rage. For a moment, her facade cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. She raised a hand, perhaps to signal her guards to attack or to surrender. It was unclear. A hush clung to the courtyard. Tyrion stepped forward, speaking softly. My sister, enough lives have been lost. You can still spare the innocent from more sorrow. Cersei's eyes flicked to him, her expression twisting with hatred and grief. Then, as if the weight of the moment proved too much, she turned and marched back inside, leaving Qyburn and the guards in disarray. A few of the red-clad soldiers dropped their weapons. Qyburn tried to rally the remainder, but they scattered. Daenerys pressed on, motioning Grey Worm to follow. They entered the Red Keep, the corridors that once led her to chains now leading her to a final confrontation. In the throne room, Cersei stood alone before the Iron Throne, breathing hard, her gown askew. The great windows let in pale light. Daenerys advanced, accompanied by Tyrion and Grey Worm. The hush was absolute, save for the distant clamoring from the city. For a moment, neither queen spoke. Then Cersei let out a bitter laugh, one that echoed in the emptiness. I had everything, she said, voice shaking with fury. I had this city, this throne, and all the power that came with it. And you, with your dragons and your foreign armies, you snatched it away. Daenerys's gaze flicked to the Iron Throne. Once she had dreamed of it as her sole destiny. Now, after all the bloodshed and suffering, it felt like a cold, jagged seed of illusions. She turned her attention back to Cersei. This was never mine to snatch. It belongs to the realm, not to any single tyrant. She paused, letting the echoes fade. I will offer you mercy, though you showed me none. Surrender. Live, if you can bear it. Cersei's lips quivered. For an instant, Daenerys thought she might comply. But Cersei's pride was a thing of steel, hammered by years of ambition and loss. She lunged toward the throne, hand extended as if she would rather die holding its spines. Grey Worm sprang forward, weapon raised, but Daenerys lifted a hand. She would not see another moment of needless bloodshed if it could be prevented. But Cersei stumbled, her foot catching on a broken fragment of tile. She toppled to her knees, letting out a choked sob. The illusions of grandeur seemed to drain away, leaving a broken woman in its place. Tyrion advanced, gently prying her trembling hand away from the throne's arm. It's over, he murmured. Stop. Outside, the bells began to toll, a signal of surrender. Daenerys felt tears sting her eyes. The city had given in, and she stood victorious. Yet she was no conqueror exulting in triumph. She was a survivor shaped by chain and flame, now poised to lead a realm scarred by war. Grey Worm's eyes, fierce with loyalty, met hers. Tyrion stood at her side, the sister he had once tried to save now in shambles at his feet. Daenerys Targaryen had emerged from the darkest captivity the Lannisters could contrive, and she had not been broken. She heard cheering from outside, but also weeping. War's aftermath was never simple. As she stepped away from the Iron Throne, she felt the weight of her responsibilities far more keenly than the lure of that cold seat. She recalled the smell of the dungeons, the memory of the manacles cutting into her wrists. She had promised herself never to allow such tyranny to flourish under her reign. Now she stood at a crossroads, determined to forge a different path for the Seven Kingdoms, one shaped not by chains, but by hope. And though the city lay battered by siege and the people's faith ran thin, Daenerys knew that with the help of those who believed in her cause, she would do her utmost to rebuild, heal, and break the wheel that had ground so many underfoot. She closed her eyes, letting the bell's final toll resonate in her chest. Then she turned to greet the dawn that spilled through the shattered windows, resolved to guide Westeros into a new day, free, at last, from the grasp of the Lannisters who had once tried to break her. She had been captured, humiliated, and brought low, but she had risen again. As the mother of dragons, as the breaker of chains, and perhaps, if fate and the people so willed, as the queen who would not turn her back on those who needed her most. She stood in the throne room as the last echo of the bells drifted into silence. Cersei was on her knees, tears of anger and disbelief clinging to her lashes, and Daenerys could hear the faint, ragged sound of Tyrion's breathing. Grey Worm shifted at her side, a silent sentinel whose devotion radiated through every tense muscle in his body. Dust motes drifted in the morning light that streamed through the shattered windows, illuminating the jagged Iron Throne. Daenerys gazed upon the monstrous seat, wrought from thousands of swords, hammered together by dragonfire, and felt all the weight of its legacy. She had once believed she was fated to claim that seat without question, that the realm needed a Targaryen restoration. But now, as the city's surrender bells faded, she could no longer view the throne with that same fervor or certainty. Cersei slumped with her hands braced against the floor, fury twisting her features. Her pride was cracked but not yet broken. Daenerys could see the old spark of malice in those green eyes. The war was essentially won, but the aftermath still hung in the balance. Daenerys took slow steps forward, crossing the broken tiles. Her footsteps echoed across the expanse of a hall that had witnessed centuries of coronations and betrayals. The mother of pearl on the columns seemed dull, stained with recent violence. She had told herself she would not become Ares II, the Mad King, nor any tyrant. Now, with the city at her mercy, the true test began. She stopped a few steps away from Cersei, resisting the urge to loom. "Look at me," Daenerys said quietly. Her voice carried a firmness beyond her exhaustion, and though she did not raise it, the words cut the hush like a blade. Cersei slowly lifted her face. Daenerys studied the fallen queen, thinking of all the torment Cersei had unleashed. The beheadings, the torched fields, the broken families. She remembered her own time in the dungeons and the humiliation of being marched before the capital in chains. "Do you demand my head?" Cersei asked, bitterness staining every syllable. "Will you put it on a spike above the gates? Or would you prefer to burn me alive, so you can watch me scream?" Daenerys drew in a measured breath. "I demand justice, but not vengeance. For that is the difference between us, Cersei." Her words were calm, but inside, her heart churned with the ghosts of the war's toll. She remembered the moment she'd been forced to kill Randall and Dickon Tarly for refusing to bend the knee, a decision that continued to haunt her. She had intended it as a show of strength, and yet the memory still tasted bitter. "You are to be tried for your crimes against the realm, as I once was forced to stand on trial. Only you will be afforded more dignity than you ever allowed me." Cersei let out a trembling laugh, something like shattered glass. "Such an elegant notion, but justice can be just another name for retribution. The moment you lock me away, you'll declare yourself the rightful queen. That is how this game is played." Daenerys did not flinch from Cersei's accusatory stare. "I do not intend to play the same game you played. I came here believing in a realm freed of tyranny. How we shape that realm will determine if I ever truly deserve the title of queen." She turned to Grey Worm, who stood like a marble statue of loyalty. "Take her to the dungeons," Daenerys said softly. Ensure she is watched but not harmed. Let her face a fair trial. Then, after the barest hesitation, she added, and see that she is given proper food and water. She refused to let cruelty linger, even for a sworn enemy. Cersei's lips curled with contempt, but there was a flicker of shock in her eyes. Daenerys stepped back as Grey Worm seized Cersei's arm, raising her to her feet. He was not gentle, but neither was he gratuitously rough. The dethroned queen was marched out of the hall under the watchful eyes of unsullied guards. Tyrion exhaled a breath Daenerys had not realized he was holding. He turned to face her, his expression complex, a swirl of relief and apprehension. "You have done something remarkable," he said softly, "allowing her to live." His gaze rested on the Iron Throne, then drifted back to Daenerys. "The city's at your feet, and you haven't embraced the same cruelty she showed you. That alone might change the path the realm will take." Daenerys felt a trembling weariness in her limbs, a mixture of relief and unresolved tension. "It's just the first step," she said. "We have a city half in ruins, and a realm that doesn't yet trust me." Her eyes flicked to the battered pillars, the broken floor where the tile mosaic had been destroyed by the chaos of war. "And we have hungry, frightened people who know only that another conqueror has laid claim to the Red Keep." Tyrion nodded. "Then we must show them you are not just another conqueror." He rested his hand at his side, wincing, clearly battered from the fighting. "We can start by ensuring the city's immediate needs are met. Food, water, shelter for those displaced. If we fail at that, no matter what we claim, the people will see only the same old power with a different face." Daenerys tilted her head slightly, acknowledging the wisdom in his words. "Have Grey Worm and the Unsullied maintain order. I want no wanton looting, no retribution. We must keep the peace." A faint, weary smile touched her lips. "In my life, I have seen enough of cruelty. If we fail to heal the realm's wounds, we're no better than the ones we overthrew." Tyrion's eyes were warm with a kind of relief and admiration, though sorrow lingered there too. "We'll make it happen, Your Grace, step by step." She thanked him, and together they left the throne room. In the corridor, Unsullied stood at attention, their discipline unbroken even after all the chaos. Outside, the city was half aflame with the aftermath of the siege, but most fires were dying out. The bells had rung for surrender, and the majority of Lannister forces had laid down arms. Daenerys walked through the keep's outer courtyard, grimly aware of the way some small folk cowered upon glimpsing her, as though expecting her to unleash dragonfire at any moment. She wanted to speak to them, to reassure them, but exhaustion threaded through her every bone. Missandei appeared at the courtyard's archway, breathless, her face alight with relief. Daenerys felt a rush of warmth. How many times had she feared losing Missandei, one of the dearest friends she had in this world? The two women met, and Missandei clasped Daenerys's hands gently, tears shining at the corners of her eyes. "You've done it," she whispered. "King's Landing is yours." "For now," Daenerys replied. "Keeping it, and holding it without turning into monsters ourselves, may be the greater task." Missandei's gaze flicked over the battered gates and the city beyond. "There's a crowd gathering in the streets, near the great September's ruins. Some are curious, some are terrified. Many are simply hungry. They look to you already." Daenerys bit her lower lip. "I cannot hide in the keep while they wonder if I'll destroy them or spare them. Let them see me. Let them hear what I have to say." She took a moment to gather her resolve. The thought of addressing a crowd that had so recently jeered her captivity rattled her nerves. Yet she had never believed leadership meant comfort. "Tyrion, assemble whoever we can trust to maintain order. Grey Worm is escorting Cersei to the dungeons. Once he's done, have him bring a contingent of Unsullied to protect the crowd from violence. I want no random attacks from either side." Tyrion nodded and hurried off. Missandei led Daenerys through the winding corridors. Occasionally, a disarmed Lannister soldier passed by, guarded by an Unsullied spearpoint. Some glared at Daenerys, others dropped their gaze in fear or shame. She felt the weight of their stares, the burden of responsibility that now fell to her. Once outside, on the stone steps that led down to the city, Daenerys paused. The sky was a pale wash of morning clouds. The smell of ash and scorched wood clung to the air. Yet there was life out there, teeming and messy, hoping for a dawn that would not bring more war. She descended the steps, Missandei beside her. A gathering of small folk and freed prisoners ringed the plaza, held at bay by a line of unsullied. The looks on their faces varied. Some curious, some hostile, many uncertain. Daenerys could sense the tension in the air as keenly as the press of wind. She was conscious of her blood-stained clothes, the grime on her hands and face. A victorious conqueror should appear regal, she supposed, but she had no illusions about the precariousness of her position. She would meet the people as she was, battered and flesh and blood. She raised a hand in a gesture that made the unsullied part their line, allowing her to step closer to the crowd. People drew back uneasily, a few motherly figures pulling children behind them. Daenerys recognized the tremor of terror in their eyes. They had seen kings and queens before, or would-be rulers of every stripe, all of them claiming power that often turned vicious in the end. She swallowed, summoning words that felt more daunting than any shout on the battlefield. "Hear me," she said, her voice echoing. "I am Daenerys Stormborn of the House Targaryen. I come not to burn your homes or chain you under a new tyranny. Many of you have heard stories of what I have done, some of them true, some twisted. You do not know me, but you do know the cost of war." She paused to catch her breath, scanning the tired faces in front of her. "I have lost friends, I have lost armies, and I have been held in chains in these very streets. I chose to spare my enemies this morning because Westeros has bled enough. You have suffered enough." A murmur flickered through the gathering. Not everyone seemed mollified, but none turned to flee. A few quietly stepped closer, perhaps searching her face for any sign of deception. Daenerys continued, raising her voice a fraction more. "You have my word, here and now, that no one will take your food or your homes from you. I have no desire to punish those who followed the Lannisters out of fear or desperation. I only ask that you give me a chance to prove I am not the villain so many have claimed." She glanced over her shoulder, seeing Tyrion reappear at the edge of the courtyard with a cluster of allies, Ser Jorah among them and Grey Worm just behind. She felt an ember of comfort at the sight of familiar faces. Then she returned her attention to the crowd. "We will distribute food from the stores that were seized. We will ensure you are safe. But I cannot do this alone. Help us restore order. Help us build something better than what was here before." Her final words carried an ache of sincerity. "I have been called the breaker of chains. Let us break them together if you will let me." A hush followed. Then an older man, perhaps a cobbler by his fraying apron, spoke up. "What if the rest of the realm rises against you? What if more armies come? Do we just trade one war for another?" Daenerys heard the quiver in his voice, the years of seeing men die for lords who never spared a second thought for the likes of him. "I cannot promise there will be no more war," she answered, soft but forthright. "For old hatreds linger. But I can promise I will not abandon you. I stand for those who have been left behind too many times. If it comes to defending this realm, it will not be for my ambition alone, but for all of us." Some in the crowd exhaled as though a weight had lifted, others looked uncertain. But no one shouted curses or threw stones. Daenerys nodded, absorbing that silence as a fledgling acceptance. She turned to Tyrion. "We must organize the distribution of food as quickly as possible," she said quietly. "The hungry cannot wait long for speeches." Tyrion, catching the tension in the air, stepped forward to address the people too. "Our queen has commanded that we open the granaries seized from the Lannisters as well as any safe stores within the Red Keep. I will personally oversee that you receive fair shares. If any soldier or official demands bribes or abuses you, bring it to the Unsullied's attention. This is your city. We serve it, not the other way around." A few heads nodded. Daenerys recognized something in their eyes, the faint glimmer of hope that always arises when one tyranny falls. She did not fool herself into believing trust could be gained so easily. Trust was earned, not seized. Still, it was a beginning. She turned, placing a hand lightly on Missandei's arm. "Will you help him see to the details? We need as many hands as possible to keep order." Missandei's face was alight with purpose. "Yes, your grace." She inclined her head, then led a small group toward the stables, presumably to commandeer carts and bring food into the streets. Tyrion and a few others followed. Daenerys, meanwhile, could feel her knees trembling from fatigue. The adrenaline of battle was fading, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. Ser Jorah approached, removing his helm. Dust and the mark of a fresh wound streaked his face. He gave her a concerned look. "You're exhausted, Your Grace," he murmured. "You should rest. The city is under our control, at least for now. Let the rest of us handle the immediate tasks." Daenerys opened her mouth to protest, but then her vision swam with the weight of her fatigue. She had spent nights planning, days fighting, barely pausing to eat or sleep. She wavered, feeling a wave of dizziness. Jorah steadied her gently. "Please," he insisted. "A few hours, at least. You cannot lead effectively if you collapse." She nodded, finally conceding. "Yes. I'll try. But only a short while." She gestured for Grey Worm, who was watching from nearby. "Keep the peace. No retaliation, no violence unless absolutely necessary. We have to show the people of King's Landing that we are not their enemies." Grey Worm bowed his head. "I will carry out your orders, my queen." His voice was resolute, though Daenerys could see the quiet sorrow in his eyes. He had lost so many of his brothers in these wars in the final push to take the city and free Daenerys from captivity. Yet he held steady, unwavering. With Jorah's help, Daenerys made her way back into the Red Keep. Parts of it were in disrepair, broken windows, scorched hallways from the fighting. They climbed a flight of stairs to a suite of chambers that had once belonged to a lesser Lannister courtier. The bed was dusty, but it was a bed. Jorah stood by the door like a silent guardian. She sank onto the mattress, her body aching in every muscle. "You should rest too, Ser Jorah," she managed, her eyelids sagging. "You're hurt." He shook his head, standing at attention like a statue carved from loyalty and weariness. "I'll guard you until the others come. Then I promise I'll see to my wound." Shiwa. That day, 5 wagons of fish and grains had arrived at the city gates. Tyrion next crossed paths with Yara Greyjoy, who had sailed into port the previous week and lingered, presumably to confirm the Iron Islands' place in the Confederation. She stood in the courtyard, conversing with a few Ironborn sailors and city guards. When she saw Tyrion approach, she dismissed her companions with a curt nod and turned to him, arms folded. "Your Grace," she said, a note of respect edged by her usual blunt manner. "I've been meaning to speak with you about our arrangement. The Iron Islands have started rebuilding their own fleet, free from any direct oversight by the Crown, just as we discussed. But some of my captains wonder if that arrangement might change once you get comfortable on your throne." Tyrion studied her. "You're worried I might decide to impose a royal navy on the Iron Islands at some point?" Yara shrugged. "Let's say our history with the mainland makes us wary. After centuries of dealing with kings who wanted us subdued, it's not easy to trust that things will stay cordial." He inclined his head. "I understand. But I don't intend to meddle in your ships so long as you don't raid our coasts." "We've reached an accord, yes?" "Yes," Yara said. "But I'd like it in writing, a formal treaty that states the Iron Islands have autonomy over their fleet, that we can sail wherever we choose, so long as we don't engage in piracy against allied regions." "That's fair," Tyrion agreed. "We'll draft such a document. In return, you must pledge that your ships will come to the realm's defense should we face a common enemy, whether it's from Essos or beyond." Yara pursed her lips, then nodded. "Done." She shifted her weight. "There's also talk among some Ironborn about the old ways. They resent me for working with the Crown, for burying the Reavers' lifestyle in favor of trade and alliances. It might spark trouble if they think I've gone soft." Tyrion could imagine that tension. The Ironborn had a proud, often violent culture, and adapting to a world of peaceful trade would not come easily to all. Reforming old traditions is never easy. Perhaps you can demonstrate that the Iron Islands still maintain their fierce spirit, but now it's channeled into protection rather than raiding. I'll support you however I can, but ultimately it's your leadership they'll follow." Yara's gaze was steady. "I know. Just be prepared for the possibility of minor rebellions. If that happens, I'll handle it, but the rest of Westeros shouldn't panic." "Very well," Tyrion said softly. "I have faith you'll do what needs to be done to keep the peace. The last thing we need is another conflict flaring in the seas." He offered a thin smile, and she met it with a firm nod before striding off toward her men. As Tyrion moved on, he reflected on how each region carried its own complexities. The North demanded security from unwanted entanglements. The Iron Islands yearned for independence of the seas. Dorne guarded its old traditions, and so on. Balancing all these demands reminded him of juggling knives, though he hoped to avoid dropping any. He realized that if he could keep them all together under a confederation, it might indeed be a lasting peace. Or at least it stood a better chance than the old system of one absolute ruler. His next destination was the Royal Library, one of the many sections that had been scorched during the final war. Tyrion had ordered it restored and restocked with any manuscripts that survived or could be copied from the citadel. He made his way through the freshly polished wooden doors. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of parchment, ink, and the faint tang of new oak shelves. A handful of scholars were at work copying texts, and Samwell Tarly stood among them, guiding a younger scribe on the correct technique for illumination. Sam turned upon hearing the soft footsteps. "Tyrion," he said, smiling. "I've been showing them how to replicate some of the oldest manuscripts. Unfortunately, we lost priceless records in the fires, but at least we can rebuild some of our collective knowledge." Tyrion nodded, gazing at the rows of shelves, many half-filled, some nearly empty. Knowledge is a cornerstone of progress. The more we preserve, the more we can learn from the mistakes of the past. Has anything interesting come to light recently? Sam's eyes gleamed with enthusiasm. Actually, yes. We found an old text detailing the laws of the first men in the north, describing how they settled land disputes and recognized certain rights for small folk. It might be useful for shaping our own legal codes under the Confederation, especially in bridging northern customs with southern practice. I've been working on a summary if you'd like to see it. Tyrion smiled. I would indeed. That sounds precisely like the sort of thing we need. Perhaps we can incorporate those ideas into the realm's new laws, or at least offer them as guidance to regional lords. Sam beamed and led Tyrion to a sturdy table where several scrolls lay unrolled. Tyrion scanned the archaic script with interest. The first men had recognized that small folk needed certain protections to maintain order, granting them limited rights to the land they farmed, so long as they pledged loyalty to their local lord. Some might call it rudimentary, but it was surprisingly progressive for an age so distant. As Tyrion read, he felt a surge of cautious optimism. If the realm could integrate the best ideas from different traditions, Undul, First Men, Rhoynar, Targaryen reforms, perhaps they could craft something that truly served the people. Of course, the challenge lay in convincing stubborn lords to adopt changes that threatened their power. But that, he mused, was the ongoing dance of rulership. He spent a solid hour discussing these ancient laws with Sam, brainstorming how they might be adapted. Their conversation ranged from land inheritance to the role of traveling justices who could hear cases across the realm. Sam proposed a network of roving magistrates, drawn from both noble and common backgrounds, to ensure that justice was accessible beyond city walls. Tyrion found the idea compelling, if ambitious. When Tyrion finally excused himself, the day had crept into late afternoon. He stepped outside, blinking in the slanted sunlight. The breeze carried a hint of approaching dusk. He was about to head back to the keep when a shout from the walls caught his attention. A guard was waving, and as Tyrion looked toward the city gate, he saw a column of riders approaching, banners fluttering. He squinted, trying to make out the sigils. A crowned stag on a field of gold. Gendry Baratheon, it seemed, had returned with an escort from Storm's End. Tyrion made his way down to the main courtyard, where the riders trotted in. Gendry, tall and broad-shouldered, dismounted first. He had never seemed fully comfortable in the trappings of nobility, but he wore his status with a kind of earnest determination. His men followed, leading 3 wagons that appeared laden with supplies. At the sight of Tyrion, Gendry grinned. "Your Grace," Gendry said, bowing his head, "I've brought fresh shipments of grain and salted fish, as promised. I've also come with news from the Stormlands." Tyrion smiled. "Excellent. Always good to see you, Lord Baratheon. What's the news?" Gendry gestured for one of his men to move the wagons onward to the storerooms. Then he turned back to Tyrion. "Well, we've got a slight problem with a few local lords near the marches. They're worried about bandit incursions from some of the areas that haven't yet fully bent the knee to your Confederation proposals. You might recall that under Cersei's rule, the marches were neglected, and that vacuum invited trouble." Tyrion nodded, remembering how the region between the Stormlands and the Reach often brewed small-scale conflicts. "What do they propose?" They want reinforcements or a royal decree that authorizes them to raise more men. But I'd rather not escalate tension if we can avoid it. Thought I'd bring the issue to you first. Wise, Tyrion said. We're already dealing with outlaws in the Riverlands. The last thing we need is open skirmishes in the marches. Perhaps we can station a small garrison there, a mix of Stormlander and royal troops. Show a united front, but in modest numbers so no one panics. Gendry nodded, relieved. That might do it. I'll convene with the local lords and let them know the crown hears their concerns. Good. Let's talk details later. For now, get some rest. I'm sure you've had a long ride. Gendry thanked him and led his horse toward the stables. Tyrion found himself momentarily pulled aside by a steward confirming where to store the incoming grain. He gave instructions and felt a flicker of satisfaction. Fewer people in the city would go hungry tonight. Yet as dusk fell, he felt a rising weariness. The realm's reconstruction was a vast puzzle, and though pieces were fitting together, a single missing piece, a bandit lord here, a rebellious minor house there, could unravel everything. He pushed that worry aside. He had dedicated himself to the long game, forging a new era for Westeros bit by bit, mindful that no single day's success or setback would determine the outcome. Later, in the grand hall where a modest evening feast had been set up for visiting lords and ladies, Tyrion took a seat at the high table. A roasted boar graced the center, flanked by bowls of root vegetables and steaming pies. The aroma was tempting, and Tyrion realized how hungry he was. He caught sight of Sansa speaking with Gendry and a few other lords, her face composed, her posture regal. Across the room, Davos was in discussion with Bronn, presumably about finances. Yara Greyjoy laughed boisterously at something her Ironborn companions said. A lively hum of conversation filled the air, mixing with the clatter of cutlery. Tyrion sampled some boar and wine, listening to the swirl of voices. The atmosphere was not so formal as the great feasts of old, but there was a shared camaraderie in the hall. Many had fought side by side in the final war, forging bonds that transcended old rivalries. Tyrion spotted a pair of knights, one bearing a Lannister crest, the other sporting the sigil of House Martell, clinking cups in a cheerful toast. Such scenes had once been unthinkable. At one point, Sansa approached him, a fresh goblet of wine in her hand. She took a seat beside him, and they shared a quiet moment of reflection, simply observing the others. Then she murmured, "It's almost pleasant, isn't it? For all the tragedies that led us here, seeing these lords and ladies mingling without plotting murder feels new." Tyrion chuckled softly. "Very new. I keep expecting someone to overturn a table and declare war, but it hasn't happened yet." She gave him a sidelong look, half smiling. "That's the magic of your rule, Tyrion. You've managed to give people hope. Just be sure to keep it alive." He raised his goblet in a small toast. "To keeping it alive." Sansa touched her goblet to his, and the soft ring of silver echoed briefly. They drank, and Tyrion felt a gentle warmth that went beyond the wine. He turned to watch as a few people began to dance in the open space at the hall's center, a lively tune courtesy of a small group of musicians. Amid the swirl of color and movement, Tyrion caught glimpses of genuine smiles. He realized how rare that was in King's Landing, a city once fueled by intrigue and fear, to see merriment without a sense of menace lurking behind it. He wondered if perhaps the realm was slowly learning a new way of being, or if it was simply enjoying a reprieve before the next storm. Determined not to let his worries overshadow the present, he joined in the conversation with nearby lords. They spoke of trade prospects, farmland yields, the possibility of cultural exchanges, mundane matters that nevertheless painted a portrait of hope. The feast wound down with no calamities. People drifted out into the corridors or back to their chambers, replete with food and drink. Tyrion excused himself as well, heading through the keep's echoing halls. A mild euphoria lingered, a sense that the day had been productive and the atmosphere unusually harmonious. Yet he couldn't entirely banish the awareness that these times were fragile, built on the trust he was painstakingly cultivating. Back in his chambers, he found a small parchment slipped under his door. Picking it up, he recognized Davos's concise handwriting. A note. "Jon Snow has returned to the city this evening. He didn't want to disturb the feast. He'll speak with you tomorrow." Tyrion's heart skipped. Jon's comings and goings were sporadic these days, as he tended to wander the north or help the free folk settle. Usually, his visits carried some significance. Curiosity mingled with a strange pang of anticipation. Tyrion pocketed the note and stepped inside. Tomorrow, then. He'd be glad to see Jon, if only to reaffirm that the realm was moving in a direction Jon would find worthy of the sacrifices made. Tyrion sat in a chair by the hearth, letting the dying embers glow settle his mind. He recalled those final days with Daenerys, how Jon had wrestled with the terrible decision forced upon him. Tyrion had urged him to act, all to prevent more slaughter. Yet that victory had broken Jon's spirit. If the realm truly stood in a better place now, perhaps Jon might find a measure of solace. Night deepened, and Tyrion dozed in his chair, slipping into half-dreams of old battles. At some point, he roused and dragged himself to bed. The next morning came with a knock at the door while the sky was still pale. He blearily told Podrick to enter, and found that, indeed, Jon Snow had arrived. Podrick's face glowed with mild excitement. Tyrion quickly dressed in a simple tunic, pinning the small royal sigil at his chest, then made his way to a private audience room. The doors were guarded by 2 knights, who bowed as he passed. Jon stood inside, looking much the same as before. Dark hair slightly longer, the lines of sorrow and determination still etched into his features. He wore leathers that bore the stains of travel, and a thick cloak thrown back over his shoulders. He turned at Tyrion's entrance, and for a moment, they simply regarded each other in silence. "Jon," Tyrion said at last, stepping forward, "I didn't expect you so soon after your last visit. Is all well in the north?" Jon bowed his head in respectful greeting, though he kept it brief. "As well as can be. The free folk have mostly settled where they wish. We see fewer stray whites now, likely all gone. But I heard rumors that the realm is changing fast, and I wanted to see it for myself. Also, I bring word. Tormund asked me to pass a message to you, though it's mostly just Tormund complaining that your crown taxes the traitors who dare cross the old border." Tyrion chuckled. "We do. But if Tormund has better ideas, I'm happy to hear them." He gestured to a chair. "Sit, please. Tell me more." Jon's gaze swept the room. He eased onto the chair, and Tyrion took one across from him. Soft morning light streamed through a tall window, illuminating the dust motes in the air. Jon inhaled. "The north is stable. Sansa's leadership is strong, and most lords respect her. I spent some time patrolling the old wall perimeter. The Night's Watch is a shadow of what it was, but it serves its purpose, ensuring no remnants of the dead slip through. Beyond that, the free folk live as they like." Tyrion nodded. "Good. Stability is all we can hope for in these times. And how are you faring, Jon?" "Truly." A flicker of something raw passed behind Jon's eyes. "I manage. I never wanted to be a king, or a leader, or any of it. But I see that you and Sansa are doing what must be done, and it's a relief to know someone capable is guiding the realm." "Thank you," Tyrion said softly. How can I say this? We're forging alliances, rearranging the old structures, but it's a delicate process. Your support, even from afar, matters. People still whisper of you as the true hero who saved us from the Night King, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne if one follows Targaryen blood." Jon stiffened, shaking his head. "I don't want that. I made my choice and the realm made its choice. That part of my life is over." Tyrion raised a placating hand. "I know. I only mention it because your presence still carries weight. If you ever choose to speak on behalf of this new confederation, it would help." A few lords remained suspicious, as they always do. Jon let out a long breath, gaze dropping to the floor. "If it truly brings peace, yes, I'll speak. But I won't be used as a figurehead or anything like that." "You won't be," Tyrion reassured him. "Just a voice when the time is right." Jon's shoulders relaxed slightly, and he changed the subject. "I saw the city on my way in. It looks different. Cleaner, less fear in the streets. The last time I was here, everything was ashes." Tyrion felt a twist of painful memory. "Rebuilding took time, and it's not finished. We still have districts in disrepair and plenty of refugees. But the spirit is changed. People believe in a future that isn't dominated by war. It's fragile, but it's real." Jon nodded, lost in thought. "I suppose that's what Daenerys wanted in her own way at the start." Tyrion closed his eyes briefly. "Yes. She had a vision of a better world. We can't forget that, even though we also can't forget how she lost her way." They sat in silence for a moment, letting old wounds ache. Eventually, Tyrion cleared his throat. "How long will you stay?" "Not long," Jon said. "I prefer the open spaces now. But I'll stay a few days, enough to see Sansa, maybe meet with anyone who needs my perspective. After that, I'll head back north. That's enough, Tyrion said. Thank you for coming. He rose and Jon did likewise. Their eyes met and Tyrion could read the complicated emotions there, regret, resolve, and the lingering sorrow of a man who had been pushed to commit an unspeakable act for the good of millions. Tyrion extended a hand and Jon clasped it, a simple exchange that meant more than words could convey. Then they parted, each to their duties. Word soon spread that Jon Snow was in King's Landing. Courtiers buzzed with curiosity, though few dared approach him directly. Tyrion spotted Jon in passing once or twice, walking with Sansa in the gardens, quietly conversing with Brienne of Tarth, who had returned from a trip to Tarth itself, and even standing on the city walls, gazing out over the sprawl of rebuilt streets. There was a haunted quality to Jon's presence, yet also a calm acceptance. He seemed content to remain mostly in the background, letting the new order solidify. Tyrion continued the daily grind of rulership, but every so often he reflected on Jon's role in it all. Could they ever truly put the ghosts of the final war to rest? He suspected that ghosts never truly vanished, only receded. Yet if the living could find a way to move forward with compassion, perhaps that was enough. A week passed, filled with the usual flux of negotiations, shipments, and domestic matters. Tyrion spent hours refining the proposed treaties for the Confederation, ensuring that the North, Dorne, the Iron Islands, the Vale, and other regions had clear terms. He oversaw the dispatch of gold cloaks to quell the bastard of Harrenhal, monitored local grain distribution, and met with the Iron Bank's observer, who proved more amenable than feared once shown the city's thriving marketplace. Each triumph was small but incremental, like a mason adding stones to a grand structure. During one lull, he dined with Jon, Sansa, and Davos in a smaller dining hall, a meal marked by subdued reminiscing and cautious talk of the future. Jon mentioned he might journey farther north in the coming months, exploring uncharted lands with the free folk. Tyrion thought it fitting. Jon had always been drawn to the edges of civilization, forging his own path. Sansa, for her part, spoke of strengthening Winterfell's old alliances with smaller northern houses through marriage pacts and trade. Davos chimed in about the city's shipping developments, how Gendry's leadership was shaping King's Landing into a maritime hub. The conversation rolled gently, free of the old distrust. Tyrion felt a strange peace in that moment, as though they were simply old friends sharing bread rather than the key figures who had reshaped the fate of Westeros. The next day, Jon prepared to depart. Tyrion stood with him in the courtyard, where a handful of traveling companions, mostly free folk, waited with pack horses. Jon, draped again in a heavy cloak, paused to shake Tyrion's hand. "Take care of the realm," Jon said, his quiet voice undercut by sincerity. "I will," Tyrion promised. "And you take care of yourself. The North can be harsh." A brief flicker of amusement crossed Jon's face. "I'm used to it by now." He mounted his horse, nodded to Sansa, who stood watching with her own blend of pride and concern, and then rode out through the gates. Tyrion found himself lingering there, watching until Jon's company disappeared into the distant bustle of the city's streets. A swirl of conflicting feelings moved through him, but he set them aside. There was work to be done. He turned to Sansa, who watched as well. She exhaled softly. "He's never truly at ease anywhere but the wild." Tyrion dipped his head. "That's who he is now. Perhaps that's who he's always been." Then, forcing himself back to practical matters, he said, "Shall we discuss the final wording of those treaties?" She nodded, and they stepped back into the keep, the brightness of day swallowing them. Over the following weeks, the Confederation treaties took shape in earnest. Liaisons from each major region arrived at intervals, and Tyrion, assisted by Sansa, Davos, Samwell, and the rest of the small council, hammered out clauses line by line. The gist was simple in principle, though complex in execution. Each region would govern itself, respecting its own customs and leadership, but they all pledged mutual defense against external threats and guaranteed open trade with standardized tariffs. The Crown in King's Landing would serve as a mediator, not a tyrant, its authority mostly centered on ensuring no one region attempted to dominate another. In theory, it sounded noble. In practice, they knew friction would arise. But Tyrion believed that if the framework was just, the realm would have a better chance of resolving disputes peacefully. The day for the formal signing arrived without fanfare, but it carried immense significance. Representatives gathered in the throne room, which had been draped with the banners of the major houses. The Iron Throne sat at the far end, but Tyrion had a long table set up in front of it instead. He stood behind the table, flanked by Davos and Sansa. Samwell was there as well, quill in hand, ready to record each signature in a bound ledger that would serve as the realm's official record. Gendry represented the Stormlands, Yara the Iron Islands, Prince Corin Martell of Dorne, Lord Royce from the Vale, and a smattering of other lords from the Crownlands, the Riverlands, and beyond. A hush fell as Tyrion stepped forward. He wore a plain black tunic beneath his small golden crown, determined not to overshadow the moment with ostentatious display. When he spoke, his voice resonated through the hall with quiet gravity. Lords and ladies of Westeros, we stand here to commit ourselves to a new kind of alliance, one built on respect for each region's traditions and a shared desire for peace. This treaty is not a chain binding us to a single throne, but a choice to unite in defense and in commerce that we might heal the wounds of war and prevent future bloodshed. Let these parchments bear witness to our determination. Let them be a promise we keep. He looked around, meeting the eyes of each representative, then took the quill Samwell offered. He signed his name, Tyrion of House Lannister, King of Westeros, beneath the carefully drafted text. One by one, the others stepped up to sign, Yara with a flourish, Gendry with a moment of concentration. He was still growing accustomed to such formalities, Corin Martell with elegant script, Lord Royce with a purposeful stroke, and so on. As each signature was added, the significance of the moment weighed on Tyrion's heart. Centuries of conflict, alliances forged and broken, kings crowned and slain, all culminating in an attempt to do better. When the last signature was in place, Samwell sanded the ink and carefully closed the ledger. A ripple of subdued applause rose from those gathered. Tyrion bowed his head, inhaling slowly. This was but ink on paper, yet symbols could shape the world if people believed in them. He turned to face the delegates. We have taken a step that no other set of rulers before us dared to take. May the gods, old and new, grant us wisdom to uphold our vows. Thank you. The ceremony ended and a modest reception followed, with wine and light refreshments. People spoke in low tones, part congratulatory, part cautious. The real work would begin now, as each region went home to implement the new terms. Tyrion circulated among them, exchanging polite words, answering questions. A swirl of relief and anxiety churned in his gut, for though the signing was a milestone, he knew the path ahead might be even more difficult. Still, it was a moment to acknowledge, a glimmer of possibility that Westeros might finally escape its cycle of devastation. When evening fell, Tyrion found himself drifting onto one of the Red Keep's lesser-used balconies, seeking a quiet moment away from the bustle. The sky was tinted with the last purples and reds of sunset, reflecting off Blackwater Bay. Far below, the city lights blinked into being, each representing a life, a story. He leaned on the stone railing, letting the cool air settle over him. Footsteps approached softly, and he glanced back to see Sansa. She moved to stand beside him, gazing at the horizon. You did it, she said quietly, or at least, you've started it. This is more than anyone dared hope for a few years ago. He exhaled, a breath tinged with a sad smile. I wish those we lost could see it. Maybe some of them can if the gods are kind. But yes, for better or worse, we've shifted the course of the realm. Sansa's expression turned pensive. Not so long ago, I'd have scoffed at the idea of trusting a Lannister on the throne. Yet here we stand, forging alliances and encouraging each region to be free in its own way. You've proven you want something more than the old tyranny. I respect that. He cast her a sidelong look. There was a time when you'd barely speak to me unless forced. She allowed a trace of a smile. We were both younger, more afraid. Time and trials change people. Tyrion, I'm proud of what you've achieved. Despite everything, you've shown the realm a new path. I only hope it holds. Her quiet, sincere tone made his chest tighten. He reached for her hand, gently clasping it. She let him, her fingers light against his. Their eyes met, and for a moment words felt superfluous. The wind stirred strands of her hair, and the hush of the evening enveloped them. Tyrion found himself recalling the day they'd been wed under duress, how strange and awkward that had been, how impossible it was to imagine standing here with genuine warmth between them. He released her hand gently, turning his gaze back to the city. We must be vigilant, he said. This peace is fragile. Old wounds, old hatreds, they don't vanish overnight. But if we can show people that cooperation benefits them more than conflict, maybe we'll break the wheel of blood and betrayal that's ground Westeros for centuries. She nodded. Day by day, decision by decision. That's how we move forward. And if you ever need the North's support, you know where to find me. He smiled, a small, genuine curve of the lips. And if the North ever needs the Crown's help, I'm here, though not in the way your ancestors once feared. A comfortable silence stretched between them, and Tyrion realized the years of turmoil had forged a bond of trust that ran deeper than formal titles. If someone had told him, back when he was just the unwanted son of Tywin Lannister, that one day he'd stand beside a Stark in shared friendship, even mutual respect, he would have laughed or cursed them for mocking him. Yet here they were, bound by experiences that few others could understand. Eventually, Sansa excused herself, saying she would leave for Winterfell soon, but that she would ensure the new treaties were honored in the north. Tyrion thanked her again for her counsel and watched as she departed. Alone on the balcony, he stayed a while, letting the city's hum drift upward. The glimmer of torchlight on the water reminded him of all the stories yet to unfold, all the lives he was sworn to protect. At length, he turned away, returning inside to finalize a few tasks before night overtook the keep. Passing through a corridor, he noticed a new tapestry hung along the wall. A stylized depiction of the war against the Night King, with silhouettes of dire wolves and dragons against a stormy sky, and men and women of various houses standing shoulder to shoulder. The stitching was beautifully done, capturing both the darkness of that threat and the unity it had inspired. Tyrion paused, tracing a hand over the embroidered figures. So many had fallen. So many had sacrificed. Perhaps, he thought, this tapestry and the treaties just signed would serve as twin reminders. The horrors of war, and the promise of something better. He moved on, descending a staircase to a lesser hall, where a handful of lords still conversed over the remains of a meal. Davos spotted him and offered a weary smile. Tyrion joined them briefly, acknowledging that the Confederation signing had gone as well as could be hoped. There was talk of trade caravans, upcoming shipments, the need to standardize currency so that each region's coins didn't confuse merchants. All small steps in shaping a cohesive realm. Eventually, Tyrion excused himself, leaving Davos to wind down with the other lords. Tyrion's mind whirred with possibilities for how the realm might evolve if given time. A realm where each region could flourish without constant fear of invasion, where small folk had a voice, where a child in Flea Bottom might dream of a better life and actually achieve it. Yet he knew even the best-laid plans could unravel. People were complicated, prone to envy, greed, and rashness. But if Westeros had endured the storms of dragons, White Walkers, and tyrants, perhaps it could endure this fragile reconstruction too. Reaching his chambers, he found a new set of letters awaiting him, likely brought by ravens late in the day. He lit a lamp and thumbed through them. One from the maester in White Harbor describing how trade routes with Bravos were resuming. Another from a minor lord in the Reach, suggesting a festival to celebrate the realm's rebirth. A third from an anonymous sender, full of half-coherent ramblings about the Targaryen line. Tyrion set that one aside with a grimace. Such letters came occasionally, scattered folk who still believed a Targaryen claimant would rise. He had learned to filter out such noise unless it contained a genuine threat. He drafted replies to the first two letters, commending White Harbor's developments and expressing cautious interest in a festival. Then, with a final sigh, he snuffed most of the lamps, leaving only a single flame to guide him to bed. He undressed, ridding himself of the day's dust, and sank onto the mattress. Closing his eyes, he reflected on the swirl of events. The Confederation was signed, a tapestry of old alliances restitched into something new. Jon had come and gone, Sansa was soon to depart, and the city's daily life hummed with cautious optimism. Night enfolded him. This time, his dreams took him through corridors of the Red Keep, but they were lit and alive, not burned or haunted. He caught glimpses of old faces, some gone, some merely far away, and none reached out with malice. It was a gentler dream, one that let him breathe. In the morning, Tyrion woke with a mixture of purpose and trepidation. The Confederation was in motion, but sustaining it would be a Herculean task. He rose, dressed, and prepared to face the new day. As he walked through the keep, each step echoed with the awareness that he was part of something bigger than his own ambitions. A realm that had endured centuries of division was finally trying unity without conquest. And so he continued, day after day, navigating quarrels, forging compromises, punishing lawlessness, and encouraging prosperity. There were times his patience wore thin, times he questioned whether any of this would hold. Yet each time he considered giving up, he remembered the faces of those who had believed in him, the small folk who just wanted peace, his allies who had risked everything for a better world, and the friends who had died hoping for something beyond the nightmares of the past. Little by little, roads were built, ravaged fields replanted, trade routes secured. Dorne re-established its traditions but sent shipments of fresh fruits and spices north. The Ironborn policed their seas rather than raiding. The Vale's Knights rode openly through secure roads, bringing grain to King's Landing. The North, fiercely independent, nonetheless participated in shared defense. Where once the realm had been a single kingdom in name but divided in practice, now it was a confederation that embraced difference while promoting unity. Not perfect, never free of tension, but a living testament to the idea that power need not be a sword at the throat of the people. Tyrion hosted councils where men and women from across Westeros sat at the same table, forging laws that might endure. He walked among the city's streets, hearing laughter more often than cries. Flea Bottom remained crowded and poor, but it no longer reeked of despair in quite the same way. Schools began to open, small ones at first, teaching letters and basic numbers to children who had once been left to beg. He allocated funds for a new aqueduct that would bring fresh water to even the poorer districts, and though it was a massive undertaking, he had the support of the Confederation's masons and engineers. Still, challenges arose. Ambitious lords tested the limits of autonomy, pushing to see if the crown would intervene or let them do as they pleased. Tyrion intervened when it endangered others, stepping in as a mediator rather than an overlord. There were skirmishes with remnants of old loyalties to House Targaryen and rumors of shadowy plots. Yet each time, the realm's new structure allowed for collaboration. If a lord or bandit threatened peace in one region, multiple regions responded. It took time, but gradually the pattern became clear. If you rose to break the peace, you faced the combined will of a realm that refused to return to the old cycles of destruction. Though Tyrion remained ever wary, he also felt a growing conviction this might work. Each day that passed without the outbreak of a major war strengthened that hope. He remembered the day Daenerys had freed him, the day she had promised a world without chains, and how that hope had turned to ashes. Now, from those same ashes, a different promise was emerging, not reliant on dragons or absolute power, but on consensus, conversation, and compromise. It was slower, more fragile, yet in that very fragility lay its humanity. Seasons shifted. The northern snows melted, and roads opened further, letting trade flourish. Festivals cropped up in various regions, celebrating harvests and crafts. The city's population grew. Taverns that once cowered under the gloom now bustled with travelers. Tyrion continued his rounds through the city, accompanied by a modest escort of gold cloaks, greeting people who no longer flinched at his approach. The stares that once mocked him for his dwarf stature had been replaced by nods of cautious respect. On one such round, he passed a group of children playing a game near the Dragon Pit ruins. They had improvised a ball from rags, kicking it around the charred stones. One child paused, recognizing Tyrion, and bowed awkwardly. The others followed suit, uncertain but curious. Tyrion crouched to speak with them, seeing wonder in their eyes. He asked their names, if they had enough to eat, how their families were faring. Their answers were shy but hopeful. Food was more plentiful, their parents had work rebuilding parts of the city, and they felt safe enough to play even near the old scorched sites. As Tyrion stood to leave, one boy tugged his sleeve. "My lord, your grace," he said, stumbling over the title, "thank you for making it so we can play without soldiers chasing us. My mother says we're lucky that the king's a good man." Tyrion knelt again so he could speak at eye level. "I'm trying to be a good king. But it's not just me. It's everyone working together. Remember that, all right?" The boy nodded solemnly, then dashed off to resume his game. Tyrion straightened and a lump tightened in his throat. He turned to his escort, forced a smile, and they continued on. That night, alone in his chambers, he thought about the weight of that child's gratitude and how easily it could be shattered if he failed. It reminded him why he could never allow complacency to set in. Months slipped by in a flurry of small triumphs and careful vigilance. The final war remained a memory that cast long shadows, yet fewer people spoke of it daily. Instead, they spoke of improved roads, fresh water, a possible new market quarter, or the latest comedic play performed in Flea Bottom. Tyrion liked to slip out on occasion, disguised as best he could, to watch these new plays and hear the jokes. They teased him sometimes, the imp king with a golden heart or the wise dwarf upon a half-melted throne. Some jests stung, but mostly he took them in stride. It was a sign of health when the king could be lampooned without fear of losing heads. One crisp morning, Tyrion awoke to a crow's caw at his window. He crossed to let the bird in, untying the small message on its leg. The scroll came from the Riverlands, bearing good news. The bastard of Harrenhal had finally been captured, along with the last of his men. They would be brought to King's Landing for trial. Tyrion felt a surge of relief. That bandit threat had lingered too long, disrupting trade. Now justice would be served. He dispatched a reply instructing that the outlaws be treated fairly, with a proper hearing rather than a summary execution. Some might view it as leniency, but Tyrion wanted to avoid turning criminals into martyrs. He went about the day's duties, meeting with the small council to discuss further improvements to the realm's currency system. Bronn complained about the complexities, but Sam and Davos pressed on. The council argued amicably for hours, eventually reaching consensus, minted coins bearing a neutral emblem to symbolize the Confederation rather than the Lannister lion or any single house's sigil. Tyrion signed off on it, secretly savoring the thought that future generations might pass coins that symbolized unity rather than conquest. As evening fell, a messenger arrived. Ed breathless, announcing that the captive bastard of Harrenhal had reached the city gates. Tyrion gathered Davos, a few knights, and made his way to the entrance. There, the Goldcloaks held a ragged band of men in chains. Their leader, a tall, grim man with a scar across his face, glared defiantly. He wore battered armor, black as soot, and he spat near Tyrion's feet as he was presented. "You'll not break me," the bastard snarled. "I fought for a rightful cause, freeing the Riverlands from your hypocrisy. You're just another Lannister puppet on the throne." Tyrion regarded him calmly. "I would hear what cause you claim, though I doubt it justifies theft and murder." The man sneered. "The Targaryen queen should have burned this city to the ground. If she had finished the job, we'd be free of your lies." Murmurs rippled among the assembled Goldcloaks. Tyrion felt a coldness in his chest, the old ache of memory. He turned to the guards. "Take him to the dungeons. He'll have a fair trial. All his men as well. Let them speak their piece to the court." The bastard spat again, straining at his chains. "Trial? You're all scum. I'll not beg for mercy from a twisted dwarf who betrayed his true queen." A few men bristled, hands on sword hilts. Tyrion held up a hand, keeping his composure. "You'll have your day to speak." He glanced at Davos, who nodded gravely, then watched as the outlaws were led into the keep. The bastard ranted the entire way, cursing Tyrion's name. Tyrion followed at a distance, unsettled by the fervor in the man's voice. Loyalists to Daenerys still lurked, feeding off resentments. This was a reminder that not everyone embraced the new order. Over the next few days, news of the bastard's capture spread quickly, fueling gossip about what fate awaited him. Some demanded a swift execution. He had attacked merchants, burned villages, killed innocents. Others, mindful of Tyrion's more measured style, expected a formal trial. Tyrion made it clear that the man would be tried openly, his crimes listed, and a verdict reached by a panel of judges from different regions. It was a symbolic moment. The new confederation would uphold due process even for a self-proclaimed rebel. The trial commenced in the Great Hall, which had been arranged with a raised platform for the accused and a panel that included Davos, Sam, Sansa, who had temporarily returned to King's Landing, and a respected Dornish delegate. Tyrion, as king, presided, but he invited them to weigh the evidence and question witnesses. The hall was packed with curious onlookers. At the center stood the bastard of Harrenhal in chains, his gaunt face twisted with defiance. He repeated the same claims, that Daenerys was the rightful ruler, that Tyrion was a usurper who had manipulated events for his own gain. He had a few scattered supporters in the crowd, jeering or murmuring approval. But most had seen enough of war and flinched at the notion of further bloodshed. Witness after witness testified about raids, murders, villages ransacked. The bastard admitted to none, denied all but the barest details, then tried to turn the trial into a political platform. Sam calmly presented records of complaints filed by the Riverlords, evidence of stolen goods. Ser Davos recounted his journeys through the region, verifying the destruction. Sansa questioned the bastard's claims, pointing out that Daenerys' conquest had ended, that the final war was over, and that forging a new realm did not require further violence. The bastard only laughed, spitting bile about how the North was just as guilty of betrayal. When all was said and done, the evidence was overwhelming. The bastard had orchestrated murder and theft in the name of a dead queen, fueling chaos. Tyrion allowed him a last chance to speak. He seized the moment to spew hate, cursing the Confederation and claiming he had allies who would rise. Tyrion remained impassive, letting the man's tirade echo. Then, by the laws the Confederation had set forth, the panel pronounced him guilty, sentencing him to death. Tyrion had hoped for some chance of redemption, but the bastard refused to show even a shred of remorse. The crowd murmured, some grim, others relieved. Tyrion stood, delivering the final words. "You took up arms not out of necessity, but out of spite and greed, using a dead queen's name as a banner for crimes. You rejected every offer of mercy or reason. The realm cannot abide such violence. May the gods judge you now." He signaled to the guards, and the sentence would be carried out at dawn. That evening, Tyrion felt a heavy weight in his chest. Though the man's crimes were clear, the decision to end a life never sat easily with him. He found Sansa in one of the smaller corridors afterward, and she read the weariness in his expression. "It had to be done," she said gently. He refused any chance at reconciliation. Tyrion nodded, rubbing his temple. "I know. And yet I still loathe the finality of it. Better this than letting him continue killing innocent people, she said, her voice quiet but firm. He let out a breath. You're right. I suppose it's my own lingering guilt that makes me wish for alternatives. He forced a small, sad smile. This is the burden of rule, isn't it? Yes, she said, and there was a flicker of old pain in her eyes. We do what we must. At dawn, the bastard of Harrenhal was executed outside the city gates, witnessed by a gathering of soldiers and townsfolk. Tyrion did not attend personally, he entrusted Davos and a few others to oversee it. Another threat put to rest, another reminder that not everyone would embrace the new order. The city went on, its people waking to work or trade, children laughing, blacksmiths hammering. One man's rebellion ended with a swing of the sword and the realm breathed a bit easier. As the weeks turned to months, Tyrion began to see fewer challenges of that nature. Word spread that those who waged war against the Confederation would face united resistance. A sense of stability grew, not perfect but tangible. The alliances between regions held, bolstered by the benefits of commerce and shared knowledge. Dorne opened more trade routes. The Vale sent miners to collaborate in the Westerlands. The North, though independent, welcomed wandering scholars from King's Landing, and the Iron Islands policed pirate activity in the Narrow Sea. In King's Landing itself, new construction projects flourished. The aqueduct was nearing completion, promising fresh water for thousands. A permanent seat of the Confederation's council took shape in a once-ruined quarter, an impressive building that would house delegates from each region. Tyrion envisioned it as a place where disputes could be aired without the looming presence of the Iron Throne overshadowing every conversation. A symbolic step away from autocracy. Sometimes he would stroll through these construction sites, surprising workers who hastily bowed and called out greetings. He saw stonemasons from the Reach working alongside carpenters from the Stormlands, supervised by an engineer from Dorne. Their mingled accents filled the air along with the steady rhythm of hammers. He'd stop to speak with them, inquiring about their families, their working conditions, and he'd often depart feeling heartened. These were the real architects of Westeros's future, forging the literal foundation of a more unified society. One afternoon, near the aqueduct's half-finished arches, he encountered a builder who recognized him from long ago. The man claimed to have repaired part of the royal apartments back when King Joffrey reigned. You used to sneak out sometimes and talk to us laborers, the man said, smiling. We thought it odd, but better you than your father. Tyrion recalled those days with a bittersweet pang. Yes, I tried to learn from everyone, not just the lords. I never imagined I'd rule in my father's place. The man nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. You do things different, your grace. I reckon it's a good difference. Let's hope this aqueduct stands longer than the old monarchy did. Let's hope indeed, Tyrion said with a warm chuckle, and he left the man to his work, wishing him well. Everywhere he went, he saw sparks of hope tempered by realism. No one expected a perfect utopia. But after the horrors they had endured, people were willing to believe in the possibility of a realm governed by something other than fear. When at last the aqueduct's primary channel was complete, Tyrion stood by with Davos, Bronn, and Sam as the valves were opened. Water rushed through, flowing from a hillside reservoir into carefully laid conduits that snaked toward the city. The crowd erupted in cheers. Children ran alongside the sparkling stream that now cascaded down stone channels into the lower districts. For the first time in living memory, King's Landing would have a reliable source of clean water. Tyrion felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. It was not a triumphant conquest or a spectacle of might, but a gift of life to the city, a sign that power could be used to serve rather than destroy. As the days slipped onward, Tyrion continued to oversee these projects, refine laws, and mediate disputes. Letters poured in from around the realm, some praising the new system, others griping about taxes or local feuds. He handled them with the help of his council, forging the realm's policies. Bit by bit, the once unthinkable confederation took root. Progress was never without setbacks, bandits still existed, minor spats flared between lords, and some old nobility seethed that a dwarf sat on the throne. But none of these obstacles overshadowed the general momentum toward cooperation. Late one evening, after a lengthy council session, Tyrion found himself alone in the throne room. The great hall was dimly lit by a few torches. He approached the half-melted iron throne, its fused swords and twisted metal reflecting flickers of orange light. For a moment he stood there, recalling all the blood that had been shed over the seat. So many had died believing it was the key to their destiny. Now Tyrion viewed it as a relic of an age marked by cruelty. Yet here it stood, and he was its occupant, the unlikely imp who had reshaped the realm. He rested a hand on one of the dulled edges, feeling the cold metal beneath his palm. Memory flashed. His father's scorn, Cersei's hatred, Joffrey's cruelty, Daenerys's tragic descent. That entire lineage of kings and queens culminating in so much suffering. He closed his eyes and let out a long breath. If these swords could speak, they would cry out with the voices of the thousands who had fallen. Lifting his hand, he turned away from the throne. The future lay elsewhere, in the Confederation's council hall, in the hearts of people who believed in building rather than burning. He stepped back, the hush of the empty hall pressing in. The realm no longer revolved around the Iron Throne alone. It was a symbol, yes, but a symbol whose meaning had changed. Now it was the seat of a king who claimed no absolute power. In that paradox, Tyrion found a quiet satisfaction. He walked the length of the hall, footsteps echoing. At the far end, he paused by the tall doors and looked back one last time. The battered throne loomed in the torchlight, neither monstrous nor glorious, just an artifact shaped by centuries of ambition. He allowed himself a small, bittersweet smile. Then he stepped out, letting the doors close behind him. A new day waited beyond, and with it the ongoing task of leading Westeros toward a peace it had never known. He would continue striving, balancing power with responsibility, forging unity from the fragments of a broken kingdom. He would listen to his advisors, trust in his allies, and when necessary, stand firm against those who sought to return to the old ways. Step by step, law by law, treaty by treaty, the realm inched forward. And Tyrion Lannister, the imp who had been mocked and dismissed all his life, remained at the heart of it, a king determined to honor the fallen by never forgetting what unchecked power could do. If the final war had taught them anything, it was that they could endure catastrophe. Now they would learn how to endure peace. It was not a fairy tale. It was full of compromises, frustrations, and occasional heartbreak. But it was real, and it was theirs. Tyrion knew the story would continue long after he was gone, shaped by those who came after. All he could do was lay a foundation, offering Westeros a chance to break free of its cycles. He hoped, with every ounce of his being, that future generations would look back on this era and say that the realm was finally guided by a king who cared more for justice than for glory, more for unity than for conquest, more for the living than for the ghosts of old ambitions. And so he carried on, day after day, with quills and ledgers instead of swords and wildfire, with discussions instead of decrees, with cautious alliances instead of forced subjugation. Each time he felt his resolve waver, he recalled the children playing in the streets, the laborers building aqueducts, the lords signing treaties in good faith, and the memory of loved ones lost to war. That memory became both his burden and his guide, reminding him always of the stakes. He might be a Lannister, but he was also a man who believed that duty to the realm could triumph over the thirst for dominance. And so Tyrion ruled. Not as the grandest or most fearsome monarch in Westeros's long history, but as a man who knew the taste of suffering and refused to let it befall others if he could help it. He ruled as someone who had learned that dwarfs, bastards, and broken things might yet shape the world in ways the proudest knights and highest lords never could. He ruled, in short, as a king who bore the scars of past mistakes and in that knowledge found the wisdom to forge a tomorrow worth living in. In those days, the realm's nights grew gentler, its dawns more promising, and the name Tyrion Lannister, once uttered as an insult, became, for many, a reminder that even the unlikeliest among them could change the course of history. The final war was over, and from its ashes rose a people determined to seize their second chance. Under Tyrion's careful shepherding, they did just that, step by painstaking step, forging a world where the Iron Throne was no longer an idol of terror, but a seat from which a dwarf with a keen mind and a conflicted heart strove to bring Westeros at last into an age of reason, healing, and hope.